With 13 series of television in the current era of the show and even more to come, Doctor Who has tons of episodes and stories during its revival. But the biggest question is, which is the best and which is the worst? Well, today, following from the recent Legend of the Sea Devil special and following the hype train to the Centenary special, I want to answer that question with a stupidly long video covering the entire current 13 series run of Doctor Who's revival. Now, just in case you're watching this video in the future, this video will only go from Rose to Legend of the Sea Devils, and hopefully, you're willing to join me on this annoyingly long journey. Now, some disclaimers. Firstly, I adore this show. It's my favourite show of all time, and despite my biases to certain eras, I will be looking closely at the stories themselves, on their own, and doing my best to ignore my opinion on the overall season that the episode is in, despite how difficult that will be at certain points. Secondly, I will only be including full episodes and specials, so no audio adventures, no shorts such as Time of the Doctor or Time Crash, or the TV movie, which personally I count as part of the classic era. I know some people count it as the current one for some reason, but for me, definitely got those classic era vibes. It should be noted, however, that I will be including the animated episodes The Infinite Quest and Dreamland, as the omnibus versions have the exact same episode length time as a normal episode of around 45 to 50 minutes, so for me they count. If you disagree, tough. Thirdly, this video is extremely long, so I'll be putting timestamps in the description as well as re-uploading each series separately in the coming weeks, so people aren't put off by that huge timestamp which is slowly taking away the rest of my life. And finally, this list is completely my opinion, and honestly, I want to know yours, so if you disagree with me on any, please let me know down in the comments in a polite manner. I know I definitely have some controversial opinions in this video, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on those. So, with all that out of the way, I hope you enjoy this stupidly long video that has driven me mad over the past couple of months, and I'll see you on the other side. So, first up on our super long pain train, we have Series 1, and honestly, when it comes to the show, I think Series 1 hits the ground running, and it doesn't slow down for a long time. Despite my attempt at not having biases, I can't lie, there will be some biases to this part because this was my introduction to Doctor Who. I started off with Series 1, like I know a lot of other people did, and because of that I do look back on it more fondly and a slightly bit more protective than the others. But I have been as critical as I can possibly be, as there are some more average episodes in this season, but for me, none that are downright bad. Just mixed or forgettable. It should also be noted that this is the first series of the show in 16 years, and the cast and crew and all the storylines and the monsters are all unique and very clever, with even the returning monsters having great moments to shine compared to their classic counterparts. And of course, I can't mention Series 1 without mentioning how amazing Christopher Eccleston is as the Ninth Doctor, and Billie Piper is as Rose Tyler. But with that out of the way, let's go into the episodes themselves. First up is Rose, an honestly brilliant way to bring the show back. All of the characters introduced in this episode are amazing and will play some kind of part in the future, and it really does shine how well the writing starts off. The Autons are also great as a returning villain, as they're not so new that new fans would feel uncomfortable seeing them and being like, oh, what's their backstory? It's not really necessary, and old fans are like, yep, this is great, these are the old ones that I know and love, without all the huffle-kerfuffle for just getting confusing with all the timey-wimey stuff. Honestly, my only issue with this episode is that the CG, and I won't mention this much in the videos because Doctor Who is a low-budget show, but the CG in this episode is truly appalling at times, and it's distractingly bad with all the bin stuff with Mickey, so I can't do any higher than giving this episode an 8 out of 10 because of that. But overall, it's still amazing, it's still great, and I love it to pieces. Up next is End of the World, and it's such a mixed bag of an episode, it's kind of difficult to explain it. It's got so many great positives, such as Rose coming to terms with her being able to travel in space and time, along with the Ninth Doctor being great as always, all the alien designs being immediately cool to look at, as well as the overall style and CG look of this episode is such an improvement over Rose. But then it's just got so many dumb moments. Like, the only way to turn on a shield is to go in front of a bunch of scary giant fans that can cut you to pieces. With the biggest issue being there's many moments like this in the episode, such as the guy who's showing them all around and basically doing the presenting for this look at the end of the world thing, having a button on his desk that just kills him, and why? It doesn't make sense. It's dumb. But like I said, there's positives and negatives, so it's a very mixed bag, meaning I'm gonna have to give it a 5 out of 10. This is followed by the first script of Mark Gatiss, who is a massive writer on Doctor Who, who's done nearly every season of the first 10 series of the show since its revival, and for a first episode, I think he does a decent job. It's spooky, it's creepy, it keeps with the feeling of it being a Charles Dickens story, with the ghost/Gelf being really, really weird to look at, and the CG surprisingly standing up. Rose and the Doctor is great as always, as well as all the supporting cast being interesting. Even ones I dislike, I know I'm meant to dislike them, so it makes them kind of likeable in a way. But my biggest issue of this episode is that it's kinda slow. There's literally only 2 proper locations in the episode, and it's just jumping between the 2 of them. And because of that, it really damages the pacing, and it's an issue of a lot of Mark Gatiss' episodes. So I have to rank this one a 7, but it does have a soft spot in my heart, and it was one of my favourites as a kid. Up next is our first 2-parter, and I will be counting these as one story. I know they're 2 separate episodes, but if you watch one without the other, it gets confusing, and I'll be doing this for the rest of the video, so I'm just covering them both here. And honestly, for our first 2-parter, it really does a good job. It brings back the cliffhangers that were made famous of the classic era, but makes them, less cheesy and a lot more modern, and a lot more interesting because of that. With all the characters shining really well, especially Harriet Jones, who had become a recurring character throughout the first 4 series of the show. Other highlights include the Slovene themselves. I think they're a really cool villain, a really cool design, and are quite creepy with how they just want to blow up the world and sell it. I think it's fun in a stupid, should be scary Doctor Who way. With of course the big highlight being, once again, the 9th Doctor, played by Christopher Eccleston. Every scene he's in, he just chews up and does so well. It should also be noted that this story is basically famous for being an allegory for the Iraq War and corruption in politics, 2 things which I love to look into, as I'm very interested in politics personally. So when a Doctor Who episode does it, and it does it right like this, not fully choosing a side, but showing how dodgy things can be, it makes it more interesting for me. And you may be thinking to yourself, wow, you're praising this episode quite a lot. And then we get to the farting. Yes, I know a lot of people comment on the dodgy CGI for the Slovene themselves at times, but I don't mind that. It's not too bad. It's not Rose levels of bad. But the farting, it's too much. Even when I was a kid, it annoyed me. So as an adult, it annoys me even more. And in the next story that they appear in Boomtown, there's only one fart joke to basically remove them from the rest of that story. It does damage the episode. If it wasn't for the fart jokes, this would be a 9 out of 10, but because of them, I have to give it an 8. After that 2-parter, it's time to go back to basics. And by going back to basics, I mean going back. Because with Dalek, we have the show's most iconic villain coming back with the best story of Series 1. Now, first up, characters are great, sets look amazing, the special effects are surprisingly good still, but I have to just remind people that the reason why this episode is as good as it is partly down to the fact that Daleks were seen as a joke. They were just stupid pepper pots with plungers on their arms and a whisk. And then this episode brought them back and made them scary again. They made them terrifying. It made them a giant Nazi massacring machine, and it does it perfectly. I can't fault this episode anywhere. I love the ending with the Doctor becoming just like the Daleks. Yeah, 10 out of 10, no questions. Up next is The Long Game, and it's another giant mixed bag for me. I love all the commentary on the news and all the general stuff with the media that it comments on. I love the fact that it brings along a one-time companion with Adam from Dalek, but everything else just doesn't work for me. I don't get the point of the Jagrafess. It's just another random monster that's thrown into the show. It's not needed, honestly. I think, like, Simon Pegg could have held his own as just a psycho guy, but no, then they just shove him there. And I also don't like the idea of the head opening thing. It's like that next level conspiracy theory that you hear QAnon people shout about all the time. And the overall ending where the Doctor just abandons Adam, it doesn't make any sense for the character, and it completely could damage time and reality. So yeah, there's some amazing points to this, like the commentary, but overall it's a mixed bag. So I'm going to have to give it a 5 out of 10. Following on from a rather disappointing episode is some people's favourite of Christopher Eccleston's whole era, and for me, it's good, but it's not great. I love all the stuff with Rose and her dad. I think all the stuff for the first half an hour of this episode is solid and brilliant. But for me personally, the moment the Doctor gets quote-unquote killed, I know it's just going to be a reset time story. Even when I first watched it as a kid, I was like, oh, okay, they're just going to reset time. And I was like 7 when this came out, so it honestly ruins all the stakes of the episode from that moment, and it really damages it in my opinion. Because up until then it was great, and then it all just falls apart. So I'm going to have to give it a 7 out of 10, and I might be being a bit generous there, but it is still a good episode. It's a good story and has some good character moments. It's just that ending really does ruin it for me. Up next is the second two-parter of the modern era with the Empty Child and the Doctor Dancers, and this episode is damn near flawless. It's terrifying. Every supporting character that you meet is important and are all very, very likeable, with literally every single part of this two-parter being brilliant. Not to mention, of course, John Barrowman's first appearance as Captain Jack Harkness, who is instantly likeable in a way that you kind of love to hate him way. And the connection that he immediately has with both Christopher Eccleston and Billie Piper shows just how well the characterization of these characters has become. And of course, you can't mention these episodes without talking about The Empty Child itself. Terrifying, so many creepy jump scares. Even as a kid, I found this absolutely terrifying. And fun story, I actually watched it at a friend of mine's house, and his mum had to walk me and my sister home because we were too scared. Honestly, I could keep screaming the praises, but I'd just be repeating myself. The only issue I have with this entire story is at the start when Rose sees the empty child on that roof thingamajigam, and she just sees this rope fall to her and doesn't look up despite the fact she's looking up and she doesn't see the blimp. Like, girl, open your eyes. Get glasses. It's fine. Just say things that are blindingly obvious, and it's always annoyed me. But apart from that, incredible two-parter, and for two-parters, I'm going to allow points to be given, so this story is a 9.5 out of 10. Brilliant. For our penultimate story of Series 1, we have Boomtown, and this episode online has such a mixed reception, and I fall on the love it side. It's just fun between two of the darkest stories of Series 1, and in fact of the whole modern era. You've got to have a bit of fun, and that's exactly what Boomtown is. It's a cheesy sequel to Aliens of London and World War III, written very quickly and relies heavily on the comedy. So the rest of the stuff, in my opinion, doesn't overly matter, apart from if it's funny. And this is one of the funniest episodes ever, so I don't see the issue. Every single joke lands for me. All of it's brilliant. Christopher Eccleston's acting is outstanding throughout this, along with the actress who plays Margaret Slevine. So yeah, 8 out of 10. It's not brilliant, but it's great. And that means we end Series 1 off with Bad Wolf and Parting of the Ways. Now, this two-parter always hits me. It's just so well done, and no other series of Doctor Who has been able to achieve this with any of its finales on this level. Now, I'm not going to say this is the best finale, because I don't personally think it is, but when it comes to narrative structure, Series 1's finale is brilliant. Every single episode and story that's appeared previously plays some part in this. It makes you feel like all the adventures you'd watched prior to this have some importance, which is something that all the later series don't really do. And on top of that, all the characters in this one are absolutely brilliant. The Daleks returning is terrifying. Rose's fake death is such a shock. Even knowing the outcome, you still go, wait, what? And then you're like, oh, yeah, no, not dead. I remember now. It's just done that well. The sets look incredible. The effects still to this day look surprisingly good. And of course, we can't not mention the ending with Chris's regeneration. But with that regeneration comes literal Deus Ex Machina. So if you don't know, Deus Ex Machina basically means like man of the machine. Basically it's a writing loophole that writers can use where they don't really know how to end stuff, so they're just like, so then this happened. That is literally what happens here. Rose just becomes part of the TARDIS and disintegrates all the Daleks, and then the story ends. It's definitely an issue, but everything leading up to that moment is done so perfectly. I can't rate it any lower than a 9.5 out of 10. It's just that good until that moment. And even then, I feel like that moment did have enough build-up with the last story, Boomtown, that it's sort of acceptable. So that is my thoughts on Series 1, but of course, we need to look at the actual rankings. So up here right now is all of the episodes in chronological order with their ratings. And now let's just switch it up to show my rankings. Now I should point out that for me a 5 out of 10 is still okay. It's an average score, it's a mixed score. So none of this season is bad to me, and it's going to be very interesting going forward, seeing where these episode placements move. Speaking of going forward, when it comes to the term mixed bag, Doctor Who Series 2 is definitely high up on that dictionary definition. It easily has some of the best stories of the first 4 series, but also some of the worst. With Christopher Eccleston being replaced by David Tennant, a new era of the show is very clear from the offset. But not everything is shiny to begin with, and honestly Series 2 is one of those series of television that I have such mixed feelings on. It's difficult to say if I love it or don't like it. This series does have some high positives though, such as Elizabeth Sladen returning as Sarah Jane Smith from the classic era, Nikki having a much stronger presence throughout it, and just a general returning of old classic Who stuff, which is really cool. I should also state that for Series 2, I do count the Christmas Invasion as the first episode of it, as I think it just sets up a lot of stuff for the rest of the series, as well as not really fitting into Series 1 very well. Even so, this series was a massive rating success, and is definitely the thing that catapulted Doctor Who to becoming one of the mainstream hitters it ended up being for basically the rest of its run. And with all that out of the way, let's go straight in with the first episode. The series starts off with a Christmas Invasion, which is such a good episode in ways that it just really shouldn't be. The fact that this is actually Tennant's first episode as the 10th Doctor, despite the fact he's not really in it, just sort of works for some reason. With Rose obviously trying to come to terms with the fact the Doctor has now changed, it helps to elevate the story and allows the audience to be confused with her, understanding this is the same character. With many returning faces from Series 1 with Jackie, Mickey and Harriet Jones, it also allows the transition to go a lot smoother. And of course the plot itself is actually quite cool, and it's surprisingly dark, to do with blood, death, suicide, all for a Christmas episode. But the biggest issue is that even though Rose and Billie Piper really do carry this episode, there's just not much Doctor in it apart from a couple of moments, and even though those moments are great, it does drag it down a little bit. So I'm going to have to give The Christmas Invasion an 8 out of 10, but it's still a great story. For the first non-special episode of a series, it's New Earth, and this is another episode which has a massive mixed response online. And once again, I fall into the love it. It's just so funny. All of the hijinks that happen because of Cassandra's body swapping makes me laugh every single time. I also love the concept of New Earth after the original Earth was destroyed in the previous series, as well as the cat people and the overall idea of the hospital mistreating and basically doing genetic experiments. It's just a cool sci-fi concept that you couldn't find in any other show. It allows Doctor Who to stand out that little bit more and start setting up some more plot threads that would come into series 3 and 4, allowing for a much better narrative consequence to this story, as well as tying up some of the loose ends from the previous series. It should be said, however, the plot itself isn't exactly the best. The idea is definitely brilliant, but the plot itself is a bit boring at times, so once again, another 8 out of 10, but still a great effort. For the second episode, with Tooth and Claw, we go for a much darker, more gothic horror style in a similar vein to The Unquiet Dead. Now, when I was a kid, this was my favourite episode of all time, as it was basically a horror movie, but as an adult, I see a lot of flaws with the story. The fact is that the first half especially drags on for a long time, with the werewolf not really playing much of a key point until the second half. As well as so many moments where characters are just like, oh, it's fine, I'll hold off for werewolf, even though we know they can't because their bullets aren't hurting it, but yeah, it just keeps happening over and over again in the episode, and it does damage it a lot. As well as everything just seeming a bit off. I can't even fully describe what's wrong with Tooth and Claw, but something's off. But when it comes to the positives, the werewolf looks great, even to this day. All the characters in the main group are amazing, and Tennant and Piper bring some of their best performances for the series, so it's still a highly enjoyable watch. And for that, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Time for some throwback now with School Reunion, a story which is actually really good and sadly overshadowed by, of course, the return of Elizabeth Sladen as Sarah Jane Smith. Now, this episode is just great. I love the plot with the Krillitanes. It's weird, it's creepy, and it's got that school vibe of being in school and thinking all your teachers are evil, with a lot of the drama between the Doctor and Rose, with Rose finding out how many other companions he's had, and how he just doesn't acknowledge them after they've gone. It allows for the audience to fully see how long this character's gone on without watching the classic era. And of course, you can't talk about School Reunion without mentioning how amazing Elizabeth Sladen is as Sarah Jane. She just immediately gets back in the character, with K9 also appearing and being brilliant throughout. The only real issue with this episode is that, once again, a lot of my issues with Series 2 is that the pacing just feels off at times, and the story does take a while to get to the point. But still, great episode, 8 out of 10. Future showrunner Stephen Moffat returns after writing The Empty Child and the Doctor Dances for The Girl in the Fireplace. I mean, this episode has got critical acclaim for a reason. It is brilliant. The emotion that the Doctor and Madame de Pompadour have with each other is so good and enthralling to watch. The overall Clockwork Monsters are cool as hell. All the jokes about the horse and all the historical moments look brilliant and cool and so realistic. Honestly, and I'm going to rag on it for a bit, even though it's just a minor part of the episode, but Mickey and Rose don't really do much, and Rose is massively sidelined by the Doctor in a very rude way, despite the fact they'd already shown they like each other. And I think overall it does just damage the episode a little bit for me. I still adore this episode, I still think it's one of the best written, but all the Rose sidelining really annoys me, so I'm going to have to give it a 9 out of 10. It's still great though, absolutely amazing. Time for our first two-parter of this series, and it's taken a while to get there, but wow, do they pay it off. Rise of the Cybermen and Age of Steel was one of my favourites as a kid. Once again, I have a lot of fond memories of Series 2, especially this first half, and even as an adult, I can't find many issues. The build-up throughout the first half, keeping the Cybermen a mystery, is cool. I just wish that they'd named the episodes the other way around. With all the parallel universe supporting characters being great, especially Ricky, who is just one of my favourite jokes. Shame that the actor's such a horrible human being, but Ricky and Mickey do a really good job at counteracting each other, with Noel Clarke doing very good in the roles. It should also be mentioned that seeing a parallel Jackie is really cool, and Pete returning, but not the Pete that we met in Father's Day, is also really awesome to see. I'm a big sucker for episodes of parallel universes. It's why I love Inferno from the classic era so much, and this one really does deliver. with a lot of mention going to the Cybermen themselves. They are cool. Lumik is a great Davros stand-in for the Cyberman version instead of the Daleks, and it really does help elevate it. Keeping him in the story as such an antagonistic force, watching basically everything that our characters are doing, keeps him very threatening. My only real issue with this two-parter is that the ending is very sudden. The Doctor's able to stop them by plugging a phone into a convenient phone port, and it reminds me a lot of the ending of Bad Wolf and Parting of the Ways, with just, we've written ourselves into a corner, the Doctor does a thing and then everything explodes. It's just a bit of a cheap cop-out for such a brilliant build-up. But apart from that, great episodes, a solid 9 out of 10. Mark Gatiss returns with The Idiot's Lantern, and it's easily one of his worst ones. Which sucks. Once again, I'm a Gatiss fan. I know not most people aren't, but I really like his work. Whilst this one, it's just not great. I will state that the setting is really cool, and the sets that they get are awesome, with so many cool little set pieces, such as the Doctor climbing the tower, all done brilliantly, as well as like the racist man and the sexist old bastard basically getting told to shut up. All good. But everything else about the episode just feels so dry, so bland and boring. Even the main villain, The Wire, just doesn't have much going for her, despite the fact she is very original as a villain. A lot of it just feels very half-baked and rushed, and I feel like that's one of the biggest issues with this episode. It's just so forgettable, and it really does start to damage the second half of the series. Meh episode, 5 out of 10. Time for a controversial opinion here, because I'm not gonna lie, The Impossible Planet of the Satan Pit will be number 1 on my list, and it may stay there by the end of this video. I just love this story so damn much. It's essentially like a PG-13 remake of Event Horizon, which is a very graphic, violent sci-fi horror movie which also mixes religious imagery. And with the fact that I love sci-fi horror, Doctor Who going full sci-fi horror is just so cool to me. I feel like it's something that the show should do more often, and it does it every now and again with episodes like Blink, but not to the level of grandeur that this two-parter does. And that's not even mentioning the amazing special effects, and of course the amazing supporting characters, minus the 2 soldiers that are basically just there to die. The rest of them are absolutely incredible. I mean, Suki is literally only in the episode for about 20 to 25 minutes, and she's not even in the second part, but you feel her presence throughout the whole thing, because even in such a short space of time, she is characterised so well. Along with the rest of the amazing supporting cast, of course, we have David Tennant and Billie Piper, who do their best job yet at solidifying the Doctor and Rose's relationship. It's just really compelling to watch, and of course, the Ood, instantly iconic, with Satan himself being a terrifying presence throughout the episode. Some truly awesome CGI, great set pieces, and the overall story being so interesting. Even knowing how it ends, I can't stop loving every bit. I also love the fact that I know a lot of people have issues with when the Satan starts saying personal things about the characters and we don't find out what they mean. I love that aspect. I think it allows us to understand that everyone's got secrets. And if we don't know them as the audience, how does this thing know them? It's cool. I love it. 10 out of 10. I love this story. Up next is another mixed bag from the internet with Love and Monsters, and for the first time, I fall on the dislike side. Not exactly hate it, I just think it's kind of below average as an episode. I can appreciate it was like a last minute addition, and I do like the idea of a Dr. Light story. I just feel like for this one, they didn't hit it very well. Elton's an interesting character to follow, but since there's no real connection to him that I don't, personally feel, I don't care enough about him. I get that the whole episode is meant to represent Doctor Who fans and stuff, but I don't know, it's just that next level of weirdness to me. The Absorbloff is also a terrible villain. Peter Kay does his best. Oh god, it's just so over-the-top cheesy. No, I love cheese, but this is too much. So much of this episode just isn't very good to me, so I can't rate it much higher than a 4 out of 10. I can appreciate they tried something new, but it just didn't land for me. speaking of last minute additions, we have Fear Her, and I'm just going to say right off the bat, there are only 2 moments in this entire episode I actually enjoy. I love the fact that when the TARDIS lands, it's the wrong way and they change it again. I think that's a brilliant joke. I also adore the council guy. He's so damn funny. Everything he just screams about the council. Everything else about this episode, however, it's bad. Oh god, is it bad? All the Olympic stuff. I don't care. It didn't even happen for another 6 years, so the fact it took place 6 years in the future is also just stupid. I don't like so much for this episode. Chloe Webber, oh my god. It's just so bad, and the abusive dad stuff could have been cool. I like it when stories go that dark, but this episode just misses that mark so badly, with Trish being one of the worst mothers of all time. Like, awful, awful episode. 2 out of 10, the lowest so far. Now to go from a low point to a high point with Army of Ghosts and Doomsday, the Series 2 finale. Now, when I was younger, as I've mentioned a lot of times in this video, Series 2 was my favourite series. As an adult, not as much. But this ending still just works for me. I love all the setup for our Army of Ghosts, with all the jokes. The Ghostbusters joke especially still makes me chuckle. I love the interactions between the characters, how connected they are. Rose being so independent throughout this story because she's dealt with this so many times by this point. As well as the full use of Jackie in this episode for the first time in quite a while. It allows for everything just to feel definitive and like a proper ending to this first little era. As well as finally giving us the answers to Torchwood, which is nice, and it introduces one of the best organisations in Doctor Who's history, and I really would like them to come back at some point. Hopefully, since Russell's back, that means that this will come back too. And of course, Daleks vs Cybermen. It had to be done one day, and I'm glad it was done as well as this. The Cult of Skaro are so cool as a concept. Daleks that can imagine. It just makes them that little bit creepier, and really ties into Dalek and Bad Wolf and Parting of the Ways. It makes it so much more interesting going back to those episodes, seeing insane Daleks compared to proper ones. And of course, no conversation about Doomsday can be said without the ending. When Rose was written out, I do find her grabbing onto the pole a bit stupid. Why would the pole fail like that? It wasn't explained earlier in the episode, but all that can be ignored because of the ending with the Rose Tyler. No, I still think this is a great story despite that little moment that does annoy me. And there's a few other little bits and pieces that I just don't think connect very well. I think the first half and the second half do feel almost like different episodes at times. No, it's still a great story, solid 9 out of 10. Great ending for Series 2. So yeah, a massive mixed bag in my opinion. I have such mixed feelings in Series 2, and I'm going to pop up the rankings right now, as you can see. Massive range of different ideas, and let's change it to how I would order them. I also just realised that I've rated all the 2-parters in the top 3. I think I did pretty much the same thing for the last one, so maybe I'm just a bit biased towards 2-parters, who knows? But yeah, a mixed bag. I still do enjoy Series 2. It does have some of the best episodes and my personal favourite story in Doctor Who history. But it also has some of the worst and some of the most average. It really does drag it down. And speaking of very mixed bags, now online a lot of people will say that Series 3 is definitely peak Doctor Who. And when it comes to its second half, I could not agree more. The entire second half of this series is incredibly good. But the first half, in my opinion, is a very average affair. I have issues with a lot of the first half of Series 3. I know most people don't, but for me, it just doesn't click well. I will say off the bat that I do like Martha. I think she does a really good job at counterproducing Rose, making her a lot more interesting by basically making her the polar opposite. Instead of a common chav kind of character, we've got a very sophisticated doctor in training. And with the fact she was the first black companion as well, that does help highlight how important this was for the entire show, and technically even the whole entertainment industry. However, there's just a few issues I have with Series 3. For example, the Martha and Doctor relationship I really don't like. But enough about that, let's go into the actual episodes themselves. First up is The Runaway Bride, which introduces Donna as a temporary companion before she becomes full companion for Series 4, and goddamn this episode is fun. No, it's not a great story, it's quite an average story, but I feel like this is just the talents of Catherine Tate and David Tennant. They bounce off each other so well, it elevates anything they're given. Now, I'm not going to say The Runaway Bride story is bad, but it's relatively average. It's fine, with some interesting plot points, but the ending and all the stuff with Donna and the Doctor are just so damn good. It's hard to take away how great this was, and for the first story without Billie Piper for the revival, it really helped show how the show can keep going even without her. For the first proper episode of Series 3, we have Smith and Jones, which arguably is one of the best first episodes of any of the series. You've got to love a series opener. With this one introducing Martha so damn well, it's kind of shocking how well she was introduced. A lot of people didn't like Martha to begin with, partly because she wasn't Rose, and partly, if we're being honest, because of racism. But even if we just ignore Martha being introduced, Tennant is on top form throughout the whole episode. The Jaduna really cool as a monster slash good guy. The plasma ball is also quite cool and really funny in a creepy way. With the whole idea of a hospital getting teleported to the moon, just being so Doctor Who. My only real issues with this episode is that it instantly introduces us to Ten and Martha's relationship, which gets really rocky and it does annoy me, especially in this episode. Great episode, 8 out of 10. Up next is the Shakespeare Code, and it's fine. I know that this episode also has quite a mixed reception online, but for me, I just find it bland. A lot of the episode is paced very badly. So much stuff just happens or doesn't happen. There's so many scenes of just dialogue being thrown between the characters which don't actually mean much. I don't care much about Shakespeare. Like, I love his work, I love him as a person, but for this episode, he just comes across as a massive dick. With the Carinites being a very cool concept, but just not done properly. I feel like they should be brought back at some point, because it seems like there was more to do with them with the witchcraft stuff, but then by the third act they're just like, oh yeah, magic portal. Okay then. Also the fact that Martha's race isn't properly addressed in this episode, it's given a throwaway line, is irritating. I wouldn't say it's a bad episode, it has a lot of good moments and good ideas, so probably a 6 out of 10. For the third proper episode we have Gridlock, and when I was younger, I adored this episode. I know a lot of people still to this day adore this episode. It has got some amazing commentary, especially with the fact that we've now gone through quarantine, on all that kind of stuff. It has some great concepts on politics, politicians, as well as social issues, and all of that is really good. I love all the drug stuff, I love the Doctor and Martha's relationship, but number one, the CG, even for the time, wasn't good. Number two, the Doctor and Martha are separated, and this early on, separating the Doctor and the companion, it can kind of make them seem not as close as they should be. And then finally is the Macra. Now, as a fan of Classic Who, the Macra Terror is one of my favourite stories, and seeing them just devolved into generic Doctor Who monster, it's so annoying. You could have picked anything else for that. Why pick the super intelligent crabs? And also, all the stuff with the face of Bo, I just find a bit dull. Above average, once again, it's a 6 out of 10. For our first two-parter of Series 3, we have Daleks in Manhattan and Evolution of the Daleks. Now, mixed bag is not a strong enough sentence once again, because all the concepts in this episode are done so brilliantly. All of the ideas work. The setting of the 1930s, all brill. The Daleks wanting to learn how to be more human, all brill. The Doctor trying to help the Daleks to finally stop them from being enemies, all brilliant. But everything else, oh god. Oh, and Hoovertown's great too, but all the characters in Hoovertown, we meet two of them. One of them's Spider-Man, for crying out loud, doing a really, really bad American accent. And then the actual human Dalek itself, oh god, why does it look like it has dicks on its face? I mean, for crying out loud, The Carled/Dals, depending on what timeline you're going with, look human. Why did he have to have tentacle face? That's not part of their genetic code. I don't get it. It just looks awful and it's performed so badly and stiltedly. There's also just so many annoying moments throughout it, like characters just keep running around the sewers over and over again. It's the stereotype of Doctor Who running up and down silly corridors. That is half of this two-parter, I swear down. With, of course, Tallulah cannot go without a mention, because if Tallulah keeps talking like this for the rest of the episode, I might actually die. It's just so annoying, and I know I went like a little bit chav towards the end, but I can't do an American accent, so I'm not even going to try. Oh god, she really does ruin everything. Every scene she's in, it just hurts to listen to. You know, for the actual concepts and some of them being filled out quite well, I have to give this two-parter a 6 out of 10. No, screw it, a 6.5 out of 10. Speaking of unrealised concepts, we have the Lazarus Experiment, which is basically a two-parter shoved into 45 minutes. No joke, the first 30 minutes feel like one episode, the last 15 feel like a completely different one. And overall, I think the idea behind this episode is great. Someone wanting to reverse the ageing process to basically live forever. It's something that's always on the concept when it comes to sci-fi. This one's good for that, but everything else just isn't. Most of the episode is very, very slow. The third act is literally just suddenly turns into a gothic horror film with no build-up before that. It's just suddenly we're in a church now because I mentioned a church at one point earlier in the episode. And everything else about it is just dry. And of course, it can't go unmentioned, the CG was appalling, even for 2007. Yeah, this episode is so mixed, I don't really know what my final thoughts are, so I guess a 5 out of 10 for solid average. Speaking of average writing, we have the first episode from future showrunner Chris Chibnall with 42, and it's bad. I mean, no, it's not bad. It is bad, but not in a way that's normally bad. It's just a lot of concepts we've seen before, except done worse. It's basically a loose sequel to the Impossible Planet-styled story, but with the 42 timer going down, despite the fact it never sticks to actually being with the 42 setting and timer of the episode. It just drags it down, and then there's just sunray monsters that just keep possessing people at certain points, and the Doctor, oh, David, what did they do to you? So much of this episode is just so crappy. It just feels unfinished, like it needed another draft, because there's so many supporting characters, but I couldn't tell you a single one of their names, and I've seen this episode many times, so I can't give it any other rating apart from a 3. But thank God that we're finally onto this two-parter. As I said at the start, the first half of this series is bad, the second half is very, very good. So with Human Nature and the Family of Blood, oh my, oh, it's just so good. I honestly struggle to find flaws with it. So much of it is just done so well. The writing for this episode is incredible. It's actually based on one of the Doctor Who novels from the 1990s, and it's just translated so well. All of the performances from David Tennant throughout this episode and this two-parter is just done so phenomenally. It just shows how good of an actor he is, being able to switch between the Doctor and John Smith. The Family of Blood are also terrifying villains. They're so creepy to look at. They're just performed so well that you can tell there's something off with them. But you can't fully describe what's off with them to begin with. It's just that well performed, with a lot of it being an allegory for the First World War and how war is bad. Oh, it's just done so... I honestly just can't stop praising this episode. And it finally acknowledges Martha's race, which is something Shakespeare Code didn't. With hands that dark, how can you know what's clean? Horrible sentence, but it was needed. People would say that back then. They should also be punched in the face, which will happen by Series 10. But it's what they would have said. It's disgusting, but it's true, and I'm glad this episode acknowledged that, with the entire ending and the Doctor's plan being really cool. But we reach my only real issue. It's just that the Family of Blood have a bunch of buttons/vents that if they all get hit in a certain order, they explode the ship. It's weird. I don't fully get it, but overall, easily an amazing story. A solid 9.5 out of 10, and such a jump up from the first half of this series. Speaking of jumps in quality, next up is Blink, and what else can be said about this episode? It's a 45-minute long horror movie, Dr. Light done right, with brand new character of Sally. Everything about the Weeping Angels is terrifying. The pacing of this episode is perfectly done. All the supporting cast are also brilliant and really highlight how well casting is to this show. And I honestly can't think of anything else to say. It's just that good. All I can keep saying is the word good and amazing and brilliant over and over again. All of this episode just works. The timey-wimey stuff just works. All of the scenes just works. It's gotta be a 10 out of 10. No questions. Now, I struggled where to put the Infinite Quest in this list, but I decided to put it here because personally I think it fits quite well here. Now, the Infinite Quest is kind of a tricky one to talk about, as it was actually an animated serial that was released on, I think, BBC 2 or CBBC, but it was edited together to be a 45-minute episode, and it is canon to this series, so I'm going to count it for here, and it's good. So the premise of this is that a crazy space pirate man wants to get onto this long-lost ship and collect a thing that can create whatever he imagines. It basically gives you your greatest desires. And the Doctor and Martha are like, nah, that's probably not a good thing to give to a psycho. The overall story is kind of bland, with lots of places being rushed through, but I have to give this episode massive credit for being animated. It does look surprisingly okay for the fact it was done on Flash quite quickly and very cheaply, and I always love when the show tries something new even if it doesn't work, but for this one, it works for me. 7 out of 10. Then, lastly for Series 3, we have Utopia, The Sound of Drums, and Last of the Time Lords. I struggled heavily to decide whether or not to put Utopia with this, but since it has so many connections to the next two episodes, I felt I kind of had to. So I'll talk about Utopia specifically as its own thing for a moment, just so it makes it a bit clearer. Essentially, a lot of it just works again. It's another Blink scenario where just everything about this episode comes together so well. It's difficult to point out specific moments. All the Yana stuff, great. All the stuff with Jack coming back, also great. Martha's relationship with the Doctor and Jack, it's so good. I nearly said John Barrowman. It's just so good. It's difficult to fault, and both portrayals of the Master throughout the episode instantly captivating, and despite the fact that he was only on screen for about 5 minutes as the Master, Shaddix does an amazing job, and I'm quite glad that the Big Finish audio dramas brought him back as much as they did. And when it comes to the next two episodes, they're quite mixed. I'd say that The Sound of Drums is a lot better. I think it's more just like a spy thriller, which is something I quite like about this idea. It's really cool to kind of see all the characters as outlaws. Martha's flat blowing up is cool. All her family getting captured is also quite an interesting concept. And just seeing the Master's rise to power happen basically throughout the whole of Series 3 without us noticing it, that's really cool. I like that. It's got a very Torchwood feel to it, and the way that Russell does these kind of series arcs, it really does make you watch back and go, I get that scene a bit more now. And its ending has such a downer cliffhanger. It's so well received. It's just hits right where it needs to. It makes everything look like it's hopeless, which is what you need for the ending of a multi-part story. Then finally, we're on Last of the Time Lords, and the first 40 minutes of this 50-minute episode is just as good as the first two parts. It's just as build-uppy. I love seeing a dystopian future. All the stuff with everything being destroyed, the Doctor versus the Master. All cool for those little arguments, despite the Doctor's little grossness being really distracting when he shrunk into the size of Warwick Davis. Sorry, Warwick. And it's just a really cool idea. I love how Martha takes centre stage, quite similar to how Rose would in a few episodes during that era. Then Space Jesus happens and just ruins so much of the story. It really does put a massive downer on it. It's kind of difficult to look past, but overall I'd say the story is an 8.5. It's a great story, it's just got a really bad ending once again. And that's it for Series 3. So, as you can see from my ratings, it's quite a mixed bag for me. None of them downright bad apart from 42 compared to last series, but a lot more average episodes. And when we change it over to the rankings, as you can see here, like I said, the first half I find quite disappointing apart from the special and the first episode, but that second half really does just up its game to like 1,000%. It just knocks so much out of the park, and apart from Space Jesus Doctor, it's truly an incredible second half to a series, and who knows what comes next? Oh wait, I do, because in total it's about 20 episodes. Now, I don't think it's a controversial opinion to say that Series 4 is where the show peaked for its revival, because, quite frankly, it just is. There aren't many issues I have with any of the stories. There's only 2 stories that I find more average than any others, and one episode I dislike, but it's the animated one and I'll get to it. I think a lot of it can kind of be attributed to Catherine Tate returning as Donna. She just does such a good job at doing both the comedy and the dark, heavy drama moments. And as I've done for the past couple of videos, I will be including the special that was technically part of Series 3 because I count it more as Series 4, as well as all the 2008 to 2010 specials featuring David Tennant, as they really do fit with Series 4. But yeah, I don't have much else to say. Series 4 is great, let's just get straight into it. First up is Voyage of the Damned, and it's not a great episode, I'll be honest. It has many issues, especially in the third act. So many characters are just there to die, and the overall tone of the episode is just so mixed between basically being a sci-fi version of the Poseidon Adventure, but on Titanic for some reason. But for some reason, and I cannot fathom why, I love this episode. Like I said, it's not good. In fact, in some aspects it's pretty bad, but I feel like it's one of those stories that circles round to being so bad it's good. Everything's just a little bit cheesy and a bit funny to me, in a way that I'm pretty sure it was not intended to be. I just find it dark in a way that's so over the top, it's just enjoyable, and the angels themselves, really creepy villains. So yeah, I like this episode. It's not great, but I'd say it's good. I'd say it's a 7 out of 10. When it comes to great episodes though, Partners in Crime just really does peak. All the stuff in this episode just works. The only real issue I have with it is that I don't find the main villain that scary. Everything else is so damn good. Everything with the Doctor and Donna is solid. Absolutely amazing writing, amazing acting, amazing direction. The adipose are so damn cute. I want one. I want one now. If someone can buy me a plushie adipose, that would make me so damn happy. I honestly can't say anything else about this episode. It's another one of those which is just really enjoyable, really fun to watch, and if I'm ever feeling down, I stick on Partners in Crime. It's a 9 out of 10. And Series 4 continues its really good streak with the Fires of Pompeii. Now, I know that this is also a bit of a mixed received episode. Personally though, I love it. It goes really, really dark, and I like how dark it goes at times. There's a few goofy moments as well, just to keep it a bit entertaining, such as the water pistol bit. I also find the sisters to be a little bit weird, because they're basically just the sisters of Khan, but in Pompeii for some reason. But everything else about the episode I really enjoy. I love the setting of Pompeii, and oh my god, Catherine Tate's acting in the final parts of the episode, they're astonishingly good. I can't get over how well she does the darker drama moments throughout the series, and this one is such a highlight. I like this episode, I love volcanoes, I love the story of Pompeii, so putting it in Doctor Who, it's good for me. Solid 8 out of 10. Speaking of solid episodes, Planet of Viewed. It's really cool. I love any time that Doctor Who looks into stuff like controversial topics such as capitalism or slavery, and this one does a really good job at it. It shows it how dirty capitalism can be, how dirty modern day economic systems can be around the world. And of course, the allegory for slavery when it comes to Viewed is done so well and so politely. My only real issues with the episode is that I like balance when it comes to commentary, and I don't think there's much saying on the positives towards the corporation. There isn't much positive to say, but stuff like the lady who seemed to not like her job suddenly being like, oh no, I'm going to go on the side of evil corporation, wahaha. Still a great episode, still another 8 out of 10, and Series 4 just keeps going up for me. Next up is the first two-parter of Series 4 with the Sontaran Stratagem and the Poison Sky. This episode also has quite a mixed receival online. I am once again in the Love It section. It's funny, there's so many good comedy moments, especially with Catherine Tate playing Donna on the Sontaran ship with all the Sontaran stuff and the Three Fingers jokes. Absolutely awesome. I also like Clone Martha, she's a really cool concept. I love when sci-fi shows look at cloning, because I think it needs to be done more often, especially in Doctor Who, because clones are just creepy by design. As well as UNIT playing a major role in this episode and bringing them back very well compared to the much more bureaucratic style they had in the classic era, this unit will shoot you in the face, and I appreciate that. Now, of course, no Sontaran story can go to mention without the fact that, yes, the Sontarans do look like potatoes, but at least this episode comments on that, and we finally, after so many times of seeing the Sontarans basically on their own in the previous stories, we see a full Sontaran attack force, and they're quite threatening. They take out a lot of unit forces who are basically the best at their jobs. I like a lot of stuff to do with the story. My only real issue is that the Atmos stuff, I find it a bit bland. We already did Corporation bad in the previous episode, so to do it straight away again does kind of take away. And also, I don't think many people would just, that many people would be like, oh yeah, let's just stick Atmos in my car. There's conspiracy theorists. This would easily have had a conspiracy theory or a billion over time. Still, I do love this story. It's an 8.5 out of 10 for me. Now we hit the first kind of more mixed episode of the series for me with The Doctor's Daughter. Cloning concepts, cool as hell, love them. Didn't have to do them twice in a row once again, but I still love the concept of this one and a lot of the heart to it of the Doctor learning to care about a family member again after all the crap they've been through with family in their past and a lot of stuff that's not been mentioned yet even in the show. It's really cool to see him come to terms with it. And of course, the I never would part, absolutely iconic for the 10th Doctor. Really good emotional moment, and the overall idea of this war only actually going on for a couple of months instead of the decades-long one because everyone keeps dying and just being cloned. That's really cool. I love all that stuff. The biggest issue of this episode is Martha. Why is she here? If her entire subplot wasn't there, it wouldn't affect the episode much, apart from to make the pacing a bit better. Still, it's a good story with some issues, so I'd say about a 7 out of 10. Time for another celebrity historical, and this time we have the Unicorn and the Wasp, where we meet Agatha Christie, and damn, this episode is once again just so funny. I'm not sure how much of this is actually the writing and directing, or just Catherine Tate and David Tennant's amazing chemistry on screen, but this episode is so funny. I love this episode. I hate wasps, so seeing a wasp as an antagonist is just a positive to me because I really don't like the flying little gits. Just so fun. I don't even know what else I can say. It's just a fun, cheesy, Agatha Christie-styled episode that actually features Agatha Christie. And I love it. It's fun, it's cheesy. All the stuff when the Doctor is poisoned is absolutely brilliant. All the stuff where the Doctor is accusing people and they think he's accusing them of things that he didn't even know about. Brilliant. Solid 8 out of 10. Great time. For our second two-parter of Series 4, we have Signs in the Library and Forest of the Dead, and it's once again written by your boy, your blinky boy, your future showrunner boy, Stephen Moffat. And it's a great final story for him before he became showrunner. So much of the episode just immediately makes you feel uncomfortable. Going into such a large area as the library and seeing no other people apart from the Doctor and Donna immediately raises suspicions before they even point it out. I also love the concept of a Vashnarada, something that's inside the shadows, any shadow, but not every shadow. It's another one of those Doctor Who things that just makes you double question something which is normally boring and mundane, and just look at it in a different light. With special mention, of course, going to the great supporting cast, who all do an amazing job, and of course, Alex Kingston as River Song, a character who by this point, we'd only just met with this episode. But in the future, this episode has so much more meaning, and it's so much more heartbreaking. Right off the bat, she's an interesting character, and you want to know more about her relationship with the Doctor. Is she a future companion? Is she the Doctor's wife? Is she just a friend who she's bumped into a few times? Does she also travel in time and space? There's so many cool questions that this episode just opens up for us, and we get answers to most of them. Granted, not all of them are exactly the best answers, but we do get answers to most of them, and I think that's really cool. The ending of the episode is also amazing. All the stuff with the Vashnarada taking everyone else out, the Doctor loading River, all brilliant. My only real issue with this two-parter is I feel like the second half is very fast-paced in a way that sometimes it's a bit hard to follow, but apart from that, truly, truly great story. 9.5 out of 10. Absolutely so fun. Speaking of dark but fun, Midnight is next, and ooh, is it creepy. I know this has become, over time, a lot of people's favourite story, and I can definitely see why, but for me personally, I can't stand any of the supporting characters, and everything else about the episode is so good, it annoys me that I hate them that much. I get you're meant to dislike them, and it's meant to show human nature and desperation. I do get that. But when I don't want any of the characters, apart from the Doctor, to survive, I don't care about your story anymore. I just want them all to die. But apart from that, like I said, everything else about the episode is brilliant. All the intros to the characters, showing how much they connect with the Doctor to start with, very clever. I love the tiny claustrophobic setting and the monster itself never being fully revealed. Really cool. 8 out of 10. Speaking of episodes that a lot of people love in more recent years, Turn Left, and it deserves that reputation. I'm not saying Midnight doesn't, but this episode deserves it a little bit more. As I mentioned earlier, I love stories that take place in parallel worlds, and for this one to take place in a parallel world where we can see the effects of stuff that didn't happen from our universe, like the universe of the main show, it makes it that a little bit more interesting, following Donna watching the disasters that unfold because the Doctor's not there to stop them. It finally answers the question, what would happen if the Doctor actually did die? Catherine Tate is also phenomenal throughout the whole episode, as is Billie Piper returning as Rose after little cameos throughout the series. And yeah, I can't say much more about Turn Left. It's just such a good story. It's so heartbreaking, and as a Dr. Light story, it works really well without him. 9 out of 10. It's crossover time with The Stolen Earth and Journey's End, and it continues to make me cry at the end, but before we get to that, let's talk about the actual episodes itself with its overall story, and god damn, it's a good one. Full-on Daleks destroying the universe-styled plot. This time nearly actually succeeding, with Davros coming back from the classic era. So well played, and he's so creepy throughout the whole story. Obviously, this episode is also famous for basically being a giant crossover episode between the cancelled Rose spin-off series, Torchwood, and the Sarah Jane Adventures, and it does a great job. It keeps all of them interesting. Granted, a lot of the characters from both Torchwood and Sarah Jane weren't able to appear due to conflicts and stuff like that. It's still cool. I love it. I just wish that more Sarah Jane Adventures characters appeared, and I wish that there was a bit more to do with Tosh and Owen from Torchwood, even if it was just like a voice thing or even like a video cameo. That would have been cool, but yeah, God, this is such a good finale for the Russell era and for Ten's era overall. I know there's a few more stories after this, but this is basically the ending, and it's so well done. All the stuff with Harriet Jones as well. Oh my, childhood me was heartbroken at that moment, seeing her come back and then just instantly get offed. All the stuff with all the characters meeting up towards the end and flying the TARDIS together. All the build-ups with them basically having mini-adventures as everything's coming to an end. German Daleks I still quote to this day with Exterminieren because it's funny. This episode and its second one, they just have so much going for them. Oh, and we see the Shadow Proclamation. After having it mentioned for so long, I honestly can't fault this two-parter. I know it has some minor issues. All of them are completely counteracted by so many more positives, so it's got to be a 10 out of 10. Absolutely amazing. Up next is our first episode from the specials that happened between 2008 to 2010 with The Next Doctor. Now, a lot of people take issues with this episode because of its very clickbaity title, and personally I agree, it should not have had that title, but the story itself is actually quite good. I enjoy it. I quite like meeting Jackson. I think he's an interesting character. I also really like the crazy cyber lady. That's cool. I also love the giant Cyberman. That's cool, if not a little impractical. Honestly, the issues of this story mostly come down to the fact that it's very, very slow in its first half. It takes a while to get really into anything, and it doesn't feel much like a Christmas special. There's not really much Christmas in it, apart from the fact that it snows so much throughout the episode. It's a little bit too blinding, but I still think it's a good episode. It's a 7 out of 10. I just wish that it got refined a little bit more. Speaking of episodes that are in desperate need of refinement, Planet of the Dead. I'm not gonna lie, this episode is average. Average as hell, and for the 200th story of the show, sort of, it kind of puts a downer on the whole thing. But like I said at the start of this video, I'm gonna be looking at the episode on its own, not taking into account that stuff. So, story is fine. It's an average Doctor goes to a planet and has to save a bunch of people story. But it is so massively elevated, in my opinion, by Lady Christina. She's just really cool. She's the antithesis of the Doctor whilst also being their doppelganger. And Lee Evans' performance as Malcolm is one of my favourite, one-off characters in Doctor Who. It's so funny, so brilliant. I think that's kind of the thing that elevates this episode. The comedy and the character interactions are just done so well. You can kind of ignore the boring plot, but it's still there. So I've got to give it a 7 out of 10. For our third special of this little mini-series, you can say, we have The Waters of Mars, and it has a massively positive reputation online because it's just amazing. The idea of water, something that is so common, being the main enemy, I am shocked it had not been done before in Doctor Who. With how many episodes and stories there were, how did it take this long? And thank God it did take this long, because the story is so good. All of the characters are so compelling. David Tennant's performance of the 10th Doctor, especially during the final moments of the episode, out of this world levels of good. I can't find many faults with this. I love how terrifying it is. I love the fact it was a Halloween special, so they went full-scale horror. I honestly just can't fault this episode. It's a 10 out of 10. Now, before the finale, let's take a little detour to Dreamland. A very strange episode of Doctor Who that kinda shouldn't be here, but also really should, as it is counted as an additional episode of this little mini-series. And I really wish that it wasn't made, I'll be honest. The only reason why this episode is not going to be my first 1 out of 10 is that I can appreciate that they tried something new. I can appreciate how different it tried to be with its more serialised approach, with each episode being about 7 to 8 minutes long. I can appreciate how it's a follow-on to The Infinite Quest. And can you notice how throughout this I'm just saying I can appreciate a lot? Because the story's really bad. The animation is Oh, it's appalling. I can't believe they actually released this and were happy with it. 3 out of 10, only because they tried something new. Talk about a strange finale. Now, this two-parter is about 2 hours long in total, and if you take just the first 90 minutes into account, it's not great. It's above average, because it's got some interesting concepts. The Master's cool. I love all the stuff to do with like the old people hunting the Doctor, and Wilf is an amazing companion. Cactus people are cool. Finally acknowledging what happened with Donna at the end of Series 4 is also great, but most of the other stuff just doesn't work. The CG for the Master, when he's got that skeleton thing, it's awful. Who is this cult of the Master? Why were they never mentioned before and never mentioned ever again? Who are these people? And no, I don't care about Big Finish and stuff like that when it comes to this. As well as just so many issues of, like, the random American guy who's building a thing to keep alive forever for his daughter, and, of course, the glass doors where at least someone has to get vented a bunch of radiation. Why not just make it so neither of them had to? But that does also get us into the last 30 minutes. And, wow. It is probably still to this day one of the best regenerations in the show's history. All the stuff building up to it wasn't great, but the actual moment where Wilf knocks 4 times breaks my heart every time, and pretty much the moment that the Doctor starts aiming the gun at the Master after breaking through the roof, from that moment on, the episode is a 10 out of 10, because it just stays consistently brilliant. I also love all the companions being revisited one last time and basically saying goodbye. Russell saying goodbye to his era. That's what it is. And the regeneration, I don't want to go. I didn't want you to go either, David. But alas, you did. And your story gets a 7.5 out of 10. So that was Series 4 and its specials. Overall, an amazing set of episodes, with about 20 in total, including Dreamland and all the specials, which makes it the longest series of the show. So, yeah, I like that, and for that I mean time-based. Don't get at me with like, oh, Series 1 had like 50 episodes or whatever. So these are my ratings for each episode, and as you can see, it's pretty consistent apart from one quite obvious one. And when we change it over to the rankings, we get some solid numbers. Even with that, ignoring Dreamland, the lowest one is a 7 out of 10, which is a good rating. I think it's a good series. I think it's a great series. I really wish that the show continued like this. It didn't, but before it starts to drop off, I feel like we need to mention something else. And that's called Matt Smith. So for Series 5, a brand new show team came in and basically replaced the old one, with Russell T Davies being replaced by Stephen Moffat, along with the producers also leaving and all the cast leaving as well. It allowed the show to basically be soft rebooted again after Series 1, and I think it has mixed results. I know that Series 5 online has gotten massive critical praise, and to some extent I agree with that. I think that it's good, but I don't think it's as great as everyone thinks. Overall, it's got some amazing stories, I'm not going to deny that. There's definitely some 9s in here, but a lot of the stories are also kind of average. Even so, I have to mention the amazing cast. Matt Smith plays the 11th Doctor so well straight away, with Karen Gillan playing a dark, kind of bitchy Amy Pond in this series that slowly starts to be a lot more loving throughout Series 6, but I still quite like her in this. And Arthur Darvill being Rory, on and off throughout the series, her Amy's partner, and River pops in because that's basically what River does during the Moffat era, and you're hearing no complaints from me. First up is the 11th Hour, and this episode does have a very positive reception online, and you can sort of see why. A lot of the acting between Karen Gillan and Matt Smith is immediately so good. it's just a great combo of actors. Along with, of course, just setting up the relationship between the Doctor and Amy, it becomes very sweet with all the bits at the start of the episode, such as fish fingers and custard, which would kind of go on to be a phrase for the rest of Matt's era. As well as, of course, introducing Rory, who'd become a very important character down the line. And yeah, all that stuff is absolutely great. The issue with this episode is genuinely just the overall plot and Prisoner Zero. It's not bad, but it's just kind of standard, which is necessary for a character introduction. Overall, I've got to give this episode an 8 out of 10. It's great, but not perfect. For the second episode, we have The Beast Below, and it's got a few issues. First of all, I'd like to say I love the premise of this episode. The idea of basically the entire of the UK being on the back of a space whale after the world's destroyed. That's really cool to me. I like all that weird sci-fi stuff. I also love all the stuff with Amy and the Doctor bonding more and more, but everything else about the episode just doesn't hit for me. I'm not too fussed about, like, the Queen Elizabeth, whatever number she is, being hundreds of years old. It's just a detail that doesn't actually matter in the grand scheme of things. And all the choices of the robot people, it's just very boring, it's standard, and there's just not much to it. And the episode's pacing is so slow, you kind of forget most of the stuff after watching it. So it's got to be a 6 out of 10. Good concept, bad execution. Speaking of good concepts and bad executions, up next is Victory of the Daleks. Now, I love a Dalek. Big fan of Dalek stories, but this one, it just doesn't hit the mark very well. I will state that, like, all the stuff to do with the Daleks themselves, ignoring the goddamn, like, colour designs of the Paradigm Daleks, all that stuff's cool. Some of it's lifted straight from a 1960s serial called Power of the Daleks, but I'm fine with that. I like some references to Classic Who, so it amused me, but so much other things about the episode, like all the Churchill stuff, it's just very inaccurate. I mean, for example, please just Google Churchill and genocide, and yeah, not great. As well as just so many things like the Robot Man and the girl Dora Bella. Yes, the episode points it out, but it's still a stupid name. I like the idea that he does become human-ish towards the end, but there's so many good points as well. I have to give it another 6 out of 10. Up next is our first two-parter of the era with Time of the Angels and Flesh and Stone. Now, for me, this is an amazing two-parter. I know in recent years people have started to go off this two-parter, but for me, I love it. It has angels being creepy as hell. It's basically like the Alien to Aliens comparison with this and Blink. It's the same kind of idea, a horror one taken to a more action horror level, and it's done so well. I love the integration of the cracks in time, really stemming how important they will be, and how important they already are, which is different to how Russell would do stuff in the first 4 series. This time the series arc is really front and centre, which I love. All the stuff with Amy and River, trying to figure out more about each other, despite the fact that River already knows Amy but can't say anything, that's really cool to me. And of course, the Doctor's relationship with both of them, really great. I'm shocked that this is actually Matt Smith and Karen Gillan's first episodes that they filmed, because goddamn do they just get into the characters immediately. It just works so well. All the horror scenes are cool. I love the part where they're shooting at the angels to give a little bit of light every time they open fire on them. That's really cool to me. It just adds to that horror aesthetic. All the jungle parts are also really cool, very visually pleasing. And Amy going blind is also really awesome. Honestly, my only real gripe with this episode has got to be the image of an angel becomes an angel, because it does kind of counteract Blink a lot, and it's something that the show would rely on way too much going forward with these monsters. But apart from that, I honestly can't find as many faults as most people. It's got to be a 9.5 out of 10 for me. I love this two-parter and I watch it so often. Now it's time for Vampires of Venice, and there's honestly not much to say. It's an average story, average supporting characters, weird comedy moments when people are dying. And overall, the story's pretty crap at times. But for some reason, I love this episode. It's one of those so awful it does go back to being entertaining to me. So much of this episode just doesn't work in a way that's kind of funny to watch. And yeah, there's honestly not much else to say about Vampires of Venice. It's just crap, but fun crap. I've got to give it a 5 out of 10 because it's just entertaining. Not good, but still fun in my opinion. For the next story, and the first one with Rory being a proper companion after Vampires of Venice where he was very sidelined, we have Amy's Choice, which is such a good concept. I love the idea of the Dream Lord basically being a darker version of the Doctor, and with the two timelines that they have to choose between, all that's really cool, with it ultimately coming down to Amy's choice of which one's real and which one isn't, with, spoiler alert, neither of them are real. That's what's so cool. Due to the fact that throughout the episode, all the characters keep saying that neither of them feel real or both of them feel real, it makes a lot more sense to have it be neither of them are, because then it just works a lot better. And the old people being alien things, it's so funny. It's dumb, but it's really funny. I also love all the stuff with Amy choosing Rory. But the issue for me that really drags down this episode is that car crash would not have caused their deaths. It's dumb and it really annoys me. Yes, the old people could have killed them afterwards, but it's always annoyed me. Even so, this is a great episode. 9 out of 10. Up next is Doctor Who and the Silurians. Oh, sorry, no, I read that wrong. It's For Hungry Earth and Cold Blood. So, bit of info for people who don't watch the classics. This two-parter is essentially a remake of Doctor Who and the Silurians, which is a third Doctor adventure for Series 7. And yeah, it's just not good. I honestly struggle to point out what's not good about this episode, apart from the fact it's boring, obviously, but I don't particularly like the supporting characters, especially the mum. Oh my god, I hate that woman so much. And just so much of the episodes is just boring talking and melodrama, which is unnecessary. It honestly feels like this episode should have just been a single episode. Cut out all the fat, all the annoying bits, and it could have been a really decent single story. Because don't get me wrong, there are some positives. I like the kid Elia, I love the new Silurian design, I know I'm in the minority there, but I do think it's a really cool design. I like the overall concept of the episode, basically being a loose retelling of the classic serial without fully adapting it, which at some points this serial literally does almost word for word. Our main three cast members are as amazing as always, and of course the ending of the second half, really shocking, really good, but everything else about the episodes just feels so bland, so lifeless, such an empty retelling of such a good classic story, and I have to give it a 4 out of 10 in total because it's not truly bad, but it's definitely below average. Speaking of average episodes, we have Vincent and the Doctor, and I wonder how many people will know with that, and it was a joke, I pinky promise. This episode is brilliant. As someone who suffers from mental health issues myself, it's nice to see depression and stuff like that represented so well in such a high concept show like Doctor Who. None of it feels pandering, none of it feels like you're being talked down to, all of it is completely correct in the way it presents how difficult mental illness can be to deal with as both the person with it and the people surrounding them. And this episode reflects it so well with the monster that I'm shocked it's not been done before. And of course there's the part where they go to the museum, nothing changed, Amy's heartbroken, and of course the part where they go to the museum with Vincent. And honestly, that part is the thing that annoys me the most about this episode. The song, I think it's Coldplay, it just really takes you out of the moment. But yeah, still an amazing episode, a solid 9 out of 10. For our penultimate story, we have The Lodger, and when I was younger, I remember really disliking this episode. I've never really been a fan of James Corden, I don't think he's very funny. Rewatching it, I was surprisingly charmed by him in this. He's not acting like he usually would, there's no fat jokes every single 10 seconds, which is what most of his jokes are, which are annoying. And honestly, he plays quite a good character with Craig. And of course, Matt Smith is great as always. I also really like the idea of it just being a normal story. Then everything gets screwed up in the third act. How did no one notice that this house gained another level? I know perception filter, before someone points it out, but perception filters do not work that way. It's established how they work. It's like you see things without fully seeing it, but people look straight at it. No one did that before when it was a single house. It's just, it really annoys me. It annoys me so much. But overall, it's still a fun story. I like all the stuff with Craig. So it's a 7 out of 10 for me. Time for the finale of Series 5 with the Pandorica Opens and the Big Bang. Now, this episode is so good in my opinion. I know a lot of people get annoyed at it for all the timey-wimey stuff and it's very Moffat-y, but I honestly really like Moffat's weirdness at times with Doctor Who, and this one just strikes me as one of the funnest. So with all the characters, they're as great as always. No surprise there. I love the plot of this one, with the first half being like a mystery and then the second half basically being like the aftermath of a Doctor Who episode, which is really cool. I love all the stuff with River taking over like a whole Roman colony, which is just so in her character and very amusing to watch. Rory's return is absolutely heartbreaking and does make sense of the second half of the episode. And just, oh my god, there's so many great moments. I love the alliance of all the monsters. Granted, it was probably just the BBC looking in one of their closets and being like, oh look, it's the hoax. Yeah, let's just stick him in there and stuff like that, but it's still fun. I still enjoy seeing all of them together, and this two-parter has got one of my favourite lines from River when the Dalek's begging for mercy and she just keeps going, one more time. So fun, so entertaining. The ending is brilliant, how it ties around the rest of the series, especially with Time of the Angels and Flesh and Stone. Love all that stuff, really clever, and of course the ending where Amy invites the Doctor to her wedding and it all comes back. So cool, such a good little ending. And yes, it does make sense, you just have to kind of think on it for a little while. And I'm okay with that. So yeah, great finale, 9 out of 10. I just wish that things were explained a little better. And that's Series 5. Overall, a good but not exactly consistent series, and I think that's the biggest issue with it. Up now will be the ratings for each episode, and as you can see, there's a lot of disparity, but when we change it over to the rankings, it doesn't look too bad. Half of the episodes are really good in my opinion, and we've got some good ones, some above average ones, and only one episode I don't like. So now, Series 5 has got a really good reception online, and as much as I agree with some parts of it, I have some issues with Series 5, and a lot of these issues were smoothed over for me in Series 6. Now, Series 6 does something that the show hasn't done for a long time, and is basically a very long serial with standalone episodes. If you watch the classic era, I honestly have very strong vibes to stuff like The Key to Time. It has a lot of that stuff to it because it's so connected, and I really do enjoy that aspect of this series. With only a few standalone episodes in the middle of the two halves, and yep, I'm gonna have to mention that this series was split into two halves, with A Christmas Carol being the special, and then The Impossible Astronaut All the Way to A Good Man Goes to War being the first half of the series, and then Let's Kill Hitler All the Way to The Wedding of River Song as the second half. It's weird, but I guess that we kind of had to do it for some reason. I'm not fully sure on the reasons. If you do know, please do let me know. But it's weird. I kind of like it though, and with that out of the way, there's only a couple of episodes that I dislike, so let's head straight into it. For our first special of this era, we have A Christmas Carol, and it is literally just a retelling of the Dickens story A Christmas Carol. And it's fun. I love how much they play it with the sci-fi concept. I love how accurate it surprisingly is to the book at times, how much timey-wimey stuff's going around, and all the ghosts of Christmas past, Christmas present, Christmas future being like our main characters. That's fun. I really like that. I also really love the relationship throughout it between the Doctor and the two supporting characters. And yet, no, it's not as good as The Muppets. And I still can't believe that that is the best adaptation of the novel. But this is a strong second place. I do enjoy this special. It's very heartwarming, but at the same time goes very dark, which is good and what you need from these kind of specials. So it's an 8 out of 10 for me. For the first episode of Series 6, we have a brand new thing with it opening on a 2-parter, and honestly, I'm shocked this didn't continue, because it's a great way to reel people in straight away. The story this time just is so good. I really enjoy the story of this one. There's so much mystery, so much intrigue, and it sets up the rest of the season so well. All the stuff with the silence is absolutely creepy and terrifying. I'm shocked they did not take off the way that the Weeping Angels did. I'd love to see them returned with the new era that's coming with Russell. And just, oh my god, I can't stop praising the monsters enough for this. They are terrifying. When it comes to the plot itself as well, it is so enthralling. Every few seconds there's a twist thrown your way, and it's a twist that you know you'll get an answer to, and I think that's what makes it different to some other episodes. These are twists that you know will get an answer, and it makes it more interesting to keep watching the rest of the series. Of course, our main four with Revert joining the group once again are brilliant. Canton Delaware III, I am shocked this character has not come back. He would have been so cool to have appeared in A Good Man Goes to War. I just want to see this dude come back. He was very chill. I love me some gay FBI man from the 1950s. I also love all the stuff with, of course, the Doctor's death, which sets up a lot of stuff down the line. And it keeps the drama between the characters realistic, with the Doctor knowing there's something up with Amy and Rory, but neither of them can really call each other out on it. And of course, the cliffhanger with the little girl regenerating, showing that the Doctor is not the last Time Lord anymore. Oh yes, no, I love this 2-parter. It's a solid 9 out of 10 for me. My only real issues with it is that the pacing for the second half is very fast compared to the first half. But no, still a great story. Love it. Time for a pit stop, with the next story being Curse of a Black Spot, and this episode has got a very mixed reception online. A lot of people either love it or really hate it, and I don't feel either way towards it. I think the idea of the episode is really cool. I love me some pirate themes, and my issue with this episode is all the sci-fi stuff. I honestly feel like this should have almost been a mythical episode, something that introduces something new to Doctor Who. Still keep it sci-fi related, but the idea of, like, the other ship being trapped in this pocket universe in the exact same spot, the people who wrote this do know that ships move, right? Even when they're anchored, ships still move, currents are still a thing. How is the ship, like, always inside of the other one? I know it sounds like a minor pet peeve, but it really does take me out of the episode personally, and just so many of the supporting characters I don't like, so it's a 6 out of 10, it's still interesting, but just a bit of a miss for me. For our third story of this series, we have The Doctor's Wife, and this episode has critical acclaim for a goddamn reason. It is so good. Why did no one invite Neil Gaiman on earlier? I know that this episode was technically meant to be part of Series 5 and got pushed back, but goddamn, Neil Gaiman should have been writing Doctor Who from the start. He's a genius when it comes to this stuff. I can't even, single out, single moments from this episode, because all of it is that good. All the stuff with the Doctor talking to the TARDIS, absolutely outstanding. Amy and Rory versus that father dude, or whatever he's called, terrifying. Brilliantly done. All the stuff in the TARDIS where they go to the old set. So nostalgia baity, but I'm happy to have my nostalgia baited. The graveyard of TARDIS, the Doctor's rage towards House. That's it, House, not father. I just can't get over how good it is. 10 out of 10. No questions. For our second 2-parter and last 2-parter of this series, surprisingly, we have The Rebel Flesh and The Almost People. I quite like it. I don't think it's great though. There's so many little issues. I like all the stuff with cloning. I think cloning is such a cool thing to play about with, especially with characters having to meet themselves. but knowing that only one of them is technically real, all that is really cool to me. I love the setting, it's very gothic and horror-y. All the stuff with like the acid, that's just neat. The two doctors part, really cool. Matt plays it so well. But so much of the episode's conflict just seems to be that there needs to be conflict. It doesn't feel organic in many places. I get that like the Flesh don't like that they've melted down some of the Flesh people. That's fine, that makes sense to me. But I think on some level they know that they're not fully real. I know there's like the denial concept, but it just doesn't seem very realistic to me that their first priority would be like, I must kill the original, like it is for the annoying girl with the ponytail. She's like, I must kill the original and become the new one. One thing I also don't get when it comes to personalities is that these lot are meant to be identical, the same memory, same personality and stuff. But when it comes to the older lady, one of them's really nice and one of them's really mean. And I get that a person can have two sides to them, but it almost seems to be like it's amped up significantly just for there to be a conflict when there doesn't need to be one. And of course, there's the CGI. And as I've said a few times in this video, I do not call out CGI in Doctor Who unless it is so blatantly noticeable it's painful to see. And oh, Jen's CGI is terrible. It looks appalling. I don't know how this even got, like, past people higher up at the BBC. And of course, the ending can't be ignored. It's a very significant ending. It leads into the next one. But overall, it's a 7 out of 10 for me. Good, but not great. So, for the mid-season finale of Series 6, we have A Good Man Goes to War. And I love this episode, I love the concept behind it, I love how it's the Doctor's greatest moment, and then he falls very far down, absolutely distraught with all the things that he's accidentally caused. Now, I can't sing my praises enough for the concept of this episode and the execution being so good. However, the only negative I can find is that all the characters we meet, apart from the two from Kirsten the Black Spot, they're all new characters basically, and I don't care about them. Bring Jack into this episode. Bring Canton Delaware III from The Impossible Astronaut. There's just like so many little things that I think could have just made this episode a bit more impactful. But when it comes to the story and the characters themselves, all brilliant, absolutely love it. It's a 9 out of 10. So for the first episode of Series 6B, we have Let's Kill Hitler, or as the Harbour channel put, Let's Unalive Evil Bad Man, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. So, yeah, this episode isn't great. It has some really cool moments in it, like, for example, all the stuff with River is just really cool. I love all the Hello Benjamin jokes. Then we reach the issues of this episode, and it's all the stuff with Mel's. Why not introduce her in a previous episode if this was your plan all along? It just makes it seem so unnecessary. It's literally like, Doctor, have you seen our daughter recently? No, I have not. But the show is about to give us flashbacks to a character who we've never met before that's about to be introduced in this episode. I wonder who they'll be. It's not good. But like I said, all the stuff with River, Alex Kingston carries this episode so heavily, and I enjoy it so much. So it's a 7 out of 10. After 4 episodes that are very important to the overall series narrative, it was about time that we went back to a more standard, standalone story, and that's what Night Terrors does, but in my opinion it doesn't do it very well. This is another Mark Guy script, and as I've mentioned a few times before, I love his scripts normally, but this one just doesn't hit for me. I find it very dull, very boring. Basically a retelling of Fear Her. However, most things are better than Fear Her, so it's not exactly singing high praises. And just so much of this episode I can't even remember. I love all the stuff with the dollhouse. I love the creepy dolls. Amy and Rory getting turned into dolls. All really cool. But all the stuff with that kid, oh my god, I can't stand him. He's such a bad actor, and I feel so sorry for the kid. No, not great. Not exactly awful, so I'm gonna have to give it a 5 out of 10 just for being bland. Up next is another standalone story with The Girl Who Waited. Now this one was double booked with Night Terrors, which is why it focuses very heavily on Amy and Rory, and god, what an episode. It's such a fun story, but also very heartbreaking. I love seeing adult Amy All of that's really cool to me. All the stuff with the different worlds, with one of them being the Red Waterfall, etc., being taking place in different times. That's really cool. I love all that concept. I love future Amy hating the Doctor and not particularly liking Rory. And all the stuff with Rory versus the Doctor. Really cool, but this episode is really massively dragged down by the start of it. You say, press the button, Rory. There's 2 buttons. What? And Amy goes for the one which is less convenient to touch? It's a bit contrived, honestly, and it does drag down the episode for me, but it's still great. It's still an 8 out of 10. Next up is The God Complex, which is another mostly standalone, but its ending does have very strong effects on the rest of Matt's era. God, this episode is just so good. I love the concept of like this sci-fi thing being an 80s hotel, a very boring 80s hotel as well, which just counteracts how weird things are. All the stuff with the rooms being your deepest, darkest fears. Really cool. Love the design of the Minotaur. All the supporting characters are amazing. That Muslim nurse, I am still heartbroken to this day she did not become a companion. I want to see so much more of her. This episode is brilliant. All the stuff with Amy's relationship with the Doctor basically being broken by him. Absolutely outstanding. And the ending where they have to leave the TARDIS. Despite the fact that there's still 2 more episodes to go. Shocking when I first watched it. Now, I love this one. The only issue for this one is, honestly, I feel it should have been a 2-part finale and tied in more to the events of the overall narrative, but still brilliant. 9 out of 10. Time for another pit stop episode, and this time we have closing time, and it's not great. It's another Craig one, and it's just bland. I have nothing to say about it. I love Cybermen stories most of the time, even the bad ones. But this one just doesn't hit for me. I find it dull. I find it very standard. I don't care all the stuff about his relationship to his kid, how you could stop a cyber conversion with love. But I have to state that once again, James Corden does do a great job at Craig. And all the stuff with Matt Smith being like as the Doctor in the shop, great. Stormageddon is so funny as a concept. It's just stupid. I love the Talk Baby thing coming back again. Yeah, it's like the episode almost should have just been a comedy with like a minor thing going on. But by shoehorning in the Cybermen and Cybermats, it makes it feel more important than it should. And that importance is just not very good. So it's got to be a 5 out of 10. So for Series 6's finale, we have The Wedding of River Song, and honestly, I find it quite disappointing, and I think I'm in the minority for that, but so much of this episode feels like a loose remake of the last series finale to me. I just don't enjoy it for that. Whilst The Big Bang had all of the universe disintegrating into nothingness, this time it's all the universes combined together into one time period, and it's kind of crappy. I like the idea of seeing a bunch of characters that we've met, meeting, seeing each other in like these wrong time zones like Churchill. But so much of it, I just don't get it. I get that like time is broken, but time is broken multiple times in Doctor Who before and it hasn't done this. I don't like this episode much. Until the ending. Now, when they kill Madame Kavarian onwards, all absolutely incredible. I love the twists, love all the stuff with Amy and Rory, so I'm giving it a 6 out of 10, mostly for the ending. And that's Series 6. Overall, I'd say it's an improvement on Series 5, even though it's not exactly great at points. So, up now is the list of my ratings, and as you can see, it's relatively consistent throughout the first half, whilst dipping up and down during the second. And when we change it over to the rankings like now, you can see that overall I do like this series. It's just the last couple of episodes are a bit bland, as well as a few others just not hitting the way they should do. I'm still a big fan of Series 6, and I think it did do a lot of changes for the overall show. And yeah, I just really think it's a good overall series. Just a very disappointing end. It really should have gone through another draft or two, in my opinion. And if it did, this might have been the best series of the show, but it's not. And next up is a series which is definitely not the best series of the show. So, Series 7 is such a mixed bag. It makes Series 2 and 3 look absolutely golden. And I think the biggest issue with it is that it's basically two series in one, and that one is not very consistent. So for the second time, the series is split into two halves, with the first half focusing on Amy and Rory, and the second half focusing on new companion Clara. And it just doesn't gel well as a series. This is also the first time since the revival that every episode is standalone with no multi-part stories, which, in my opinion, also takes stuff away from the feel of the show. I'd have to say, though, I do think that Jenna Coleman does a good job in this series as new companion Clara. I don't think she does the best job later on down the line, but for this one, she's a decent follow-up to Amy and Rory, and the first half is so weird. But with that said, let's do the special first and see where that takes us. First up is The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe, and honestly, before rewatching it, I had basically no memories of this episode apart from the giant robot / wooden man bit. And yeah, on rewatch, I was pleasantly surprised actually. Yeah, I didn't expect this either, but it's actually a very charming episode. It's not great by any means, but I love all the stuff with the family basically coming to terms with their dead dad, and the Doctor wanting to change that and make him feel better. All the stuff with the other universe is really cool to me. The tree people are also pretty neat. I think they're an awesome idea. Not realised fully well, but still pretty cool. And the overall performance of the supporting cast is really entertaining as well. Kid actors who can actually act is always a positive in my opinion. And yeah, the comedy in this episode actually made me chuckle quite a few times. It's not great, like I said, but it's a solid 7 out of 10. Now, for the first episode of the proper start of Series 7, we have Asylum of the Daleks. I actually really like this episode. I think it's solid. I love the story. I love the character interactions. All the stuff with Fake Clara is really cool to me as well. I love the design of the planet, bringing back all the old Daleks. Seeing the giant, basically council of the Daleks. Really cool with them begging the Doctor for help. But there's an elephant in the room, and that's that the Daleks believe in purity. Why would they build an asylum of insane ones instead of just kill them like they do at the end of the episode? No, it's a giant problem with it, and personally I can overlook that. I know a lot of fans can, and I completely understand that. But personally I can kind of overlook it and just see the episode for what it is. And I think it's a great episode apart from that. So it's an 8 out of 10 for me. But I can see this is definitely going to get me a lot of disagreements. For the second episode of the first bit of Series 7, we have dinosaurs in a spaceship, and I like the dinosaurs. I think they're really cool. I like all the stuff with Rory's dad, and all that stuff's really cool to me, and it really does elevate it. The rest of the episode, however, is some of the worst written, worst performed even from our main cast, and just horrifically designed concept ever. I honestly don't know how this one was made. Were they that desperate for scripts? Nothing about this works. The new supporting cast that are just brought into this episode and act like companions are terrible. I don't care about Nefertiti. I don't care about this horrifically sexist Poacher. Why would the Doctor be friends with them? The villain is terrible. Their, plan is just, ha ha ha, I'm evil, and Unit is like, ha ha ha, I blow up now. It's gotta be a 4 out of 10, and that is only that high because of Rory's dad. No joke. For our third episode in this little mini-series, we have A Town Called Mercy. And I think this is a great episode. I love a Western setting with sci-fi. I think sci-fi Western is just such a cool little look to it that's very unique to that subgenre. I love the idea of looking at the aftermath of a war, where someone at that time during the war would have be seen as a war hero, and now is seen as the war villain. I think it's cool, and it's something that happens quite a lot in modern day war as well. And I think it's cool to look at that kind of stuff. I love the Doctor's connection with both the experiment and the Professor. I think it's really cool to see how he relates to both of them and doesn't want to acknowledge that he does. Amy's also brilliant in this episode, as is Rory, and overall I think it's just really fun. I honestly wish that this was a two-parter, because its pacing is very rushed, but it's still a great episode. It's an 8 out of 10 for me. For the 4th episode of Series 7, we have The Power of Three, and honestly, if I was rating this episode just on the first half an hour, basically until they find Cube Man, it would genuinely be a 9 out of 10. I love the comedy in this episode. I love the Doctor hating the fact that he doesn't know what's going on. I love all the stuff with Unit where they're basically trying to figure out the cubes, and so it's like, what if it's like just a weird alien marketing campaign? Brill, seeing Amy and Rory's day-to-day lives, and obviously Rory's dad coming back, also really fun. And then it just goes downhill so aggressively, it kind of gives you whiplash. Cube Man is the worst villain of all time. What did all the hospital people with the weird faces mean? What did the girl who could, change colour mean? What does any of this mean? It means nothing, and the grand villain's plan is just to poison everyone with more cubes? It's awful, really bad ending. It's a 4 out of 10. And for the last episode of the first half of Series 7, we have The Angels Take Manhattan. Now, this episode is controversial because people are stupid and don't listen to words that are actually said in the episode. Now, everything about this episode is perfect. All the stuff with the main cast is brilliant. Amy and Rory's exit makes me cry every single time I watch it. River is brilliant throughout it. And yeah, do you know what? I'm going to acknowledge all the stuff with the Statue of Liberty. It is established in the episode multiple times, if you actually listen to the dialogue, which is most of the episode, by the way, that the angels can manifest things into people's heads to make them think that something is there to keep them in the hotel. It's literally said out loud in the episode. Watch the episode and actually listen for crying out loud. But that ran over. Absolutely incredible episode. I adore it to pieces. It's a 10 out of 10. Time for a mid-series break now, and we have The Snowman, which is a Christmas special that rounded out the first half of Series 7. And honestly, it's a good time. You might have gathered by now, I am actually kind of a fan of the Christmas specials. I know not many of them are exactly great, but a lot of them are quite fun and good. Whilst this one I would definitely argue is just a great story overall. Its Christmas setting isn't overly important, but it's also very relevant. I love all the stuff with the Paternoster gang, I love all the stuff with fake Clara. All that's really cool. I honestly prefer this version of Clara to the one we'd get in the main show. Bringing back the Great Intelligence is also a genius idea, and he's honestly very creepy throughout. I also love the nanny who turns into the creepy ice lady. That's awesome to me. That's the way to do it. It's something that me and my boyfriend quote each other all the time because it's funny. Honestly, my only real issue is that snowmen aren't scary, no matter how many teeth you put on them, and it does dampen the episode, but still a great episode, a solid 8 out of 10 for me. That leaves us to the first proper episode with Clara with the Bells of St. John. Now, this episode is definitely good, but it's not great. The episode's pacing is what completely ruins it, 'cause everything else about this episode is very enjoyable. I love all the Wi-Fi concepts, all the stuff to do with Clara and the Doctor being connected, all the stuff with the Great Intelligence starting to control reality in some places and basically taking over people's minds. The Doctor driving up the Shard is stupid, but in the way that I love it, the way that only Doctor Who could do it and make it entertaining. I also just really love the overall idea of this episode. And then the pacing ruins it. Everything's really slow and then really fast. It's like you're constantly getting stalled on the M62 or something. There's no real flow to the episode, and it's one of those things that is going to become a very, very common theme throughout the second half of Series 7. So it's a 7 out of 10 from me. Up next is the Rings of Akaten, and it basically just is there to solidify Clara as a new companion. And personally, I don't like this episode. I like the idea of it, where it's basically sacrificing people. All that stuff I find really interesting and conceptually quite cool because it's happened in reality. Groups like this have existed. So seeing it happen in space with Doctor Who is something that I highly appreciate. And I also like the idea of the giant sun god being a big dickhead. But once again, pacing for this episode is horrific. All the stuff with the leaf is just so laughably stupid. I can't stop laughing every time I watch it. And honestly, the only real saving grace of this episode is, number one, that song. It is beautiful. I really do enjoy it. And of course, the 11th Doctor speech. It's my favourite Doctor speech of all time. And it elevates it to a solid 6 out of 10. Cold War's a 10 out of 10. Give me hate, bitches. Yeah, that's not a joke. I actually really love this episode. Yes, the pacing's a bit off, as is the rest of the second half of Series 7, but I think it's brilliant. It's essentially Alien, but taking place during the Cold War on a Russian submarine and with an ice warrior. I'm not gonna lie, if this episode had a different monster, apart from the Ice Warriors, it would be an 8. But I love me an Ice Warrior. They're my favourite villain after the Daleks from the classic era. I love the Ice Warrior stories. So the fact that this is an episode I like, and it has an Ice Warrior in it, 10 out of 10. Fight me. I know I'm going to get so much hate for this, because so many people don't like this episode. But genuinely, Cold War is a 10 out of 10. After the hate comments I'm going to get for Cold War, the next episode after that is Hyde, and it's a good episode. It's not great, it's nothing really special, but I do love the idea of the pocket dimensions, something which a lot of the second era of the show would play with, which I really do enjoy. I like the supporting characters, even if they are a bit bland, but the thing for me that really elevates this episode is that there's no real villain. I love the idea that the monster that's in both the Pocket universe and the monster that's in our universe are actually just trying to find each other. It's almost like a weird love story, and I wish it expanded on that a bit more, but overall it's a cute concept and I do like it. I also like the haunted house feel. I like the twist that it's revealed that ghosts aren't real, as we'd know by this point anyway with Doctor Who. And no, it's a good episode, just missed the mark on certain points, especially of its characters. So it's a 7 out of 10 for me. Speaking of missing the mark with characters, Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS is one of those episodes that I can really appreciate what it tried to do, more than what it actually achieved. First up, all the supporting characters are very dislikable. I don't care that they lived by the end of the episode. I don't like any of them. I wish they didn't. The only one I slightly care about is the android guy, but the other two are just horrible. I don't care what lessons they learn, because time was reset anyway, and this episode, honestly, to me, feels like it was originally a two-parter. Most of the episode falls to the regular Doctor Who running up and down silly corridors, and honestly, the only saving grace of this episode is all the stuff with the cool TARDIS globe things. I love that idea. I love when the Doctor and Clara go down into, like, the weird tree zone. Oh, that's cool. I love it so much. I just wish the rest of the episode was up to that standard. So, it's a 6 out of 10 for me. Next up is The Crimson Horror, which is another Mark Gatiss story, and I know this episode has a very mixed reception online. I definitely fall into the love side. It's not great, but it is complete cheese. All the stuff with, like, the Doctor and Clara going up north. As someone who's from, like, the north, I'm up for some jokes and some jabs, and they are really good, really well placed, especially if Strax keeps saying the north over and over again. This episode isn't good, but it's so fun, you can't help but smile. Once again, the pacing is horrific. I don't know if I mentioned it for the last 3 episodes, but yeah, all got bad pacing too. But I can almost look past it, because this episode is almost designed to be dreamlike and weird. So the bad pacing almost works in its favour with all, like, the different flash forwards, flashbacks. I really like this episode, but yeah, it's very clunky. So it's gotta be an 8 out of 10. Now, speaking of clunky, we have Nightmare in Silver, and honestly, I think this episode gets a bad rap for reasons I don't fully understand. I love the idea of bringing Clara's babysitting kids with them for an adventure, because realistically they would probably find out, because she wasn't being very secretive about it. I also love the idea of the Cybermen constantly upgrading, That's really cool. I'm shocked it's not been done before. It's a really logical next step to take from where they basically evolve as they die. I also love a lot of the supporting characters, especially Warwick Davis. I think he does a really good job as someone who's obviously pretending to be someone that they're not. I also love all the stuff with like the little group of characters who are all pretty useless soldiers. I always like the underdog story, so that one works really well. And all the stuff with the Doctor fighting the cyber controller with gold. So yeah, it's not a great episode, but it is also a very great episode. So for me, it's an 8 out of 10. Time for another disappointing finale, and this time we have The Name of the Doctor. Yeah, this episode is weird to me. It almost doesn't feel like it should be a series finale, and to some extent it's not, because the next two specials kinda serve that purpose. First, I'll just say that I love all the stuff with the Paternoster Gang. It's great to see the last time we see River Song chronologically, as I know she does come back in a couple more episodes, but chronologically, this is the death of her. This is the last time we see her in her timeline. It's really cool and really neat, and I love the explanation to Clara being the impossible girl, the Great Intelligence finally getting killed off once and for all, but there's just not much finality to this episode, and since it was a series finale, we have to treat it like that. I know there was 2 more episodes afterwards, but there's no finality. A lot of this episode is just very padding. It's just setting up the next 2. And I take strong issues with that. It's got to be a 7 out of 10 for those reasons, but it's not bad. So, minor spoiler, I am a big fan of multi-Doctor stories. I'm just a huge Doctor Who nerd, so anytime you put 2 of them together, I'm probably going to like it. Yes, I am that basic, and Day of the Doctor delivers, in my opinion. I love all the stuff with dealing with the aftermath of the Time War. Finally, we finally get to see the conclusion to that story arc. All the stuff with 10 and 11 bantering, absolutely brilliant, and John Hurt as the War Doctor is really good too. Clara and Unit are also very necessary to the episode, so they don't feel like they're just sidelined, which I also appreciate. I also like the fact that even though the Daleks are in it, they're not the main antagonists, and instead it's the Zygons coming back. Yeah, I love that. That's cool. I think that's a really good way to bring them back. The only real negative I have for this episode is I'm a big fan of Paul McGann. I love his audio stories, and I really do wish that he was there instead of John Hurt, as it would explain a lot of my issues with the next episode. Still, brilliant story, really fun, really sad at times. It's a 10 out of 10. Gotta be. Last up is Time of the Doctor, and this one's a mixed bag. I will state right now that the whole concept of this being the Doctor's last regeneration really doesn't make sense. We saw him trying to regenerate in Series 6, and just multiple times throughout other moments, it's never even been slightly established that this is the last body for the Doctor. That being said, the rest of the story is amazing. It's a huge roundup of the Matt Smith era, really brings together a lot of stuff from his previous 3 series. The regeneration also makes me cry, and I cry a lot at TV shows. It's a problem. But no, all the stuff with Handles is also really cool. I love all the stuff with Clara. She does a really good job throughout the whole episode, grounding it. And yeah, apart from the fact that the regeneration thing makes no sense in the grand scheme of things, I still like this episode. It's still an 8 out of 10, mostly for that regeneration. So yeah, that's Series 7, and it's a very mixed bag. As you can see right now, I've got all the ratings for each episode on, and it jumps up and down so much. It's like you're on a goddamn roller coaster. And when we change it over to the rankings, as you can see, it basically stays the same. We have a lot of very high rated episodes, a lot of more mixed related episodes, and then a couple of bad episodes. This series is just such a bland time. I think the lack of 2-parters does play heavily into that, in my opinion, and I just don't find this one that great. Overall, I've still given it a higher rating than Series 5, but that's mostly due to the way that I just rank episodes compared to my opinions on the series. Because if it was that, Series 7 would definitely be at the bottom of this list at this point, because it's just structured so badly. But still, it's a good send-off to Smith and leads us right into the weirdest received era in Doctor Who history. So before I start tearing this series to pieces, I should disclose that I am a huge Capaldi fan. He is my joint favourite Doctor, along with the 8th Doctor, the 10th Doctor and the 4th Doctor. But his first series isn't that great. Most of his episodes aren't good, and it kinda sucks. I will state though, right off the bat, him as the 12th Doctor, Capaldi that is, instantly brilliant. I love how cynical and just all done with everything Capaldi is. It's really cool. I really love this new aspect after so many giddy Doctors. Yeah, it's cool. I love the idea of an old Doctor, and for this series, Clara ain't great in my opinion. I think that Jenna Coleman does a good job with what she's given, but there's not much of a connection between her and Capaldi for this series, and it really does drag down the characters. But that being said, let's get into the actual episodes themselves. So the first episode is Deep Breath, and if this was just a regular 45 to 50 minute episode, this would be one of my favourites. But the episode's about 70 minutes long. 30 minutes of that is solid padding for some reason. So much of the episode is just basically looking at Clara's reaction to the Doctor regenerating, and as important as that is, it's something that fans have seen multiple times before by this point. It's nothing surprising, so I don't get why everyone's treating it like this is the first regeneration of Modern Who. Yeah, that happens. Pretty much the entire world knows it by this point, so there's no one really teaching about this. I also think just so much of a paternoster gang is there for padding. I don't really know how to describe this episode because there's so many amazing concepts and moments. Everything with Capaldi is truly brilliant. But the pacing is very similar to Series 7. It's just not there. It's way too padded, and it did not need such a stupid runtime. It's still a 6 out of 10 for me, all because of Capaldi. For our second episode of this series, we have Into the Dalek, and yep, big Dalek fan, so I hear the word Dalek and I'm instantly intrigued. And it's good. Not great, but it's good. I love all the stuff with Rusty becoming like a good Dalek, the Doctor being called a good Dalek. That's really cool. The joke, "Are you out of your mind? No, I'm inside a Dalek," is my favourite Doctor Who joke of all time. It makes me laugh every time. But it's got this weird feeling to it that it's just not very fun. The episode seems very dry of humour at times, very soulless. But yeah, it's still a good episode, it's just very drab at times, and it has that big issue that Series 8 has of just feeling kinda dull. It's a 7 out of 10, but it could have been much higher if it was in a different series. Speaking of my favourite Doctor Who jokes, we have the Robot of Sherwood, which does have my second favourite joke of Doctor Who history, with the "Has anyone ever punched you in the face? Not yet. Lucky I'm here then." Oh great, love Capaldi once again. I also love the idea of Robin Hood being kind of real but also really not, and how it kind of conflicts with the Doctor's opinions on time and reality. It really does draw into question this character's knowledge, and it makes it so interesting to see them not really accept that they could ever be wrong. Robin Hood's also great, and Clara's a lot more interesting in this episode from the last one, but everything else about the episode is very bog standard. It's not overly entertaining. The villain is just kind of weak, and the actual robots themselves aren't very threatening, so you don't really feel like there's many stakes to the episode, and it really drags it down. Once again, the awful pacing of this series. What is it with Series 7 and 8 just having bad pacing? But yeah, it's a 6 out of 10. Could have been a lot better. Up next though is Listen, and it's definitely the start of the highlights of Series 8, as it does have quite a few highlights. Now, personally, I don't find it as good as many people say, but I still find it creepy. I still don't fully understand what that shadow thing was that moved the bed, if it was actually no one to begin with. But No, it's got that amazing style that Stephen Moffat brings to Doctor Who, with the timey-wimey stuff almost becoming like sort of horror movies, and an element of Blink is definitely in this. And I do enjoy it for all that aspect. I love seeing the Doctor's childhood being explored a little bit. All the stuff with future Danny Pink, which is completely broken in the timeline. And I also really like Clara in this episode. She really does show how much she truly cares about the Doctor no matter whose face he's wearing. And it really just started to strengthen their relationship, which would fall apart throughout this series. But yeah, it's still a great episode, and a solid 8 out of 10. Speaking of solid episodes, it's time for the second part in a pretty good trilogy of decent episodes in Series 8 with Time Heist. Now, this episode is essentially like a Mission Impossible styled bank heist, cool guy, over-the-top thing, but done in the style of Doctor Who with weird sci-fi shenanigans. And I really enjoy it. I love the monster in this being actually a good guy that's being controlled by just greedy people. I love the supporting characters in this episode. I think they're both fleshed out really well and could almost fit into the TARDIS team with no real questions from me. And Capaldi and Clara, once again, just showing how well they can actually get on together. It's really cool. I love this episode, and it's definitely a highlight of the series for me. It's an 8 out of 10. Next up is The Caretaker, and this is just a fun episode. No, it's not that great, but all the stuff with the Clara versus the Doctor, I really like. Also, I've just realised I called her The Clara. I think I'm going to do that for the rest of this video, so I'm leaving this bit in. So, throughout the episode, The Clara is trying to talk to Danny and basically deal with all their drama going on, which is a bit boring, I will state, and it's the biggest weak point of the episode. But all the stuff with the Doctor calling Danny PE, I do find really funny. You must be only into over-the-top manly things. And especially with it being the Doctor themselves, I do find that an interesting thing to once again, this series' main positive is showing the flaws of the Doctor, and it plays heavily into Capaldi/12's main motivation throughout his era of am I a good man? I love the monster, like the little robot killing machine. I think it's cool. Coal Hill School is also a great place to come back to after so many years. So for me, it's another 8 out of 10. Just could have done with a bit more polish. And then we have Kill the Moon, which completely ruins the flow that this series was starting to get. So for this episode, the Clara and the Doctor go onto the moon with an annoying kid from the previous episode, and the moon is a giant egg, and yeah, it's just not great. Honestly, all of this episode is really bland to really bad, apart from one bit. And it's when the Doctor tells Clara, this is your problem, you can deal with it. I think that's so cool. It's something we've not seen the Doctor do. I think it plays heavily onto the relationship of the Doctor and Clara throughout this series, which is massively under turmoil throughout it, and I like that in some aspects. And then when it comes to this episode, it's handled brilliantly. I just wish that the episode wasn't a pro-life abortion commentary. No, it's not a good episode. It's a solid 4 out of 10, and it's mostly elevated by just that moment between the Clara and the Doctor. Following on from the last episode, this was originally sort of meant to be Clara's final story, and Mummy on the Orient Express would have been an amazing send-off to the character. Honestly, it's the best episode so far this series, and in my opinion, it's the best episode of this series. I love the setting, I love how it's basically an Agatha Christie story again, and it's done so well. All the jokes of Aggie My Mummy, once again, nostalgia baiting works on me, so I love that stuff. Clara's very good in this episode. Why was she not this great throughout the rest of the story so far? Her connection with the Doctor is also really interesting to watch, with them both thinking it's the last time, until realising that they just love it too much to stop. Now, the murders and stuff is cool. I love the train conducting guy. He's really neat. And all, the kills are so terrifying to watch. What would you do in that scenario? The only bit that lets it down is the ending, where it just suddenly explodes and it doesn't make much sense, but still, it's a 9 out of 10. Love this story. It's time for Flatline, where the Clara literally takes on the role of the Doctor and does it surprisingly well. So, throughout the series, a lot of stuff had been building up between the Clara and the Doctor, and for this episode, the Clara basically takes the role of them. It's quite good. I love the fact that the Doctor is stuck in the TARDIS but just keeps shrinking. I find it really funny. All the stuff with the Clara basically getting her own companion throughout the story with Rixie, and then having to deal with these 2D monsters trying to break into a 3D plane. All really cool. I love the concept of this one. I think that they should play around with 2D and 3D environments more in Doctor Who. Really cool. It's aesthetically very pleasing. The deaths are terrifying in this one. Why is it suddenly that the last 2 episodes have a terrifying death? No, and the Clara really does shine throughout the whole thing. Jenna Coleman does an amazing performance. No, it's a great episode. It's a solid 9 out of 10 for me. Love this one as well. Then we hit the biggest roadblock in the planet with In the Forest of the Night, and it's bad. Oh, it's so bad. The only thing about this episode, which is not going to give it a 1 or 2 out of 10, because I'll just get this out of the way first, I love the environment. I think it's beautiful. I also like Doctor versus Clara in this episode. It really builds up to the finale. But everything else is bad. The Doctor acts like a selfish little arsehole throughout the episode. Clara acts like an entitled little bitch throughout the whole episode. Danny acts like such an arrogant fucker throughout the episode. How am I meant to root for any 3 of these people during this argument when they all keep lying and manipulating each other? I don't like any of them in this episode. The kids are all annoying, the actual plot itself is basically nonsensical, I don't care about this little girl. But like I said, the visuals are really pretty at times, and some of the moments between the characters are decent. It's a 3 out of 10, but just barely. That's when we finally reach the series finale for Series A, and it's Dark Water / Death in Heaven. Now, personally, I really like this finale, even with it having very obvious faults. First up, it's our first 2-parter since the goddamn Flesh People, which is, 3 years ago by this point in the show, and goddamn it was about time. I also love all the concept for heaven basically being like this weird, almost cloud-like thing. I think that's actually what they call it in the episode, the Cloud. Like, that's cool, that's kind of scary, that's very Doctor Who. Granted, its tone almost feels like Torchwood, because it gets very, very dark in places. Like, almost not suitable for kids level dark. But I feel like that's the point of Capaldi's era, so I'll let it slide. And of course, I can't not mention Michelle Gomez as Missy. Missy is my favourite incarnation of the Master, because I feel like there's just so much more to her than just evil villain. She's truly insane, but in a way that she almost knows she's insane and wants to stop, but doesn't know how to. All the stuff with Unit is also great, as well as all the stuff with Clara at the start. I adore the opening sequence where Clara keeps destroying the keys and it's revealed to not be real. It shows just how much these characters have started to fall out, and how much a Doctor and companion relationship can decay over time. And no, I really love this 2-parter, but the issue is, it's very boring. Yeah, despite all my praise and all the positives in the story, oh my god, this could have been an hour special. This is the one series finale that actually only needed 1 episode. It didn't need 2. As so much padding happens, they keep going place to place, but it doesn't really evolve to anything. So, yeah, it's an 8 out of 10 for me. I don't think it's as bad as people say, but it's definitely not perfect. And that rounds up Series 8 with the last episode / Christmas special, Last Christmas. Now, this was originally meant to be the last episode to feature Jenna Coleman as Clara, thus the part where she gets old at the end. But overall, I think this episode's pretty decent. I love Alien, and this movie is literally Doctor Who does Alien again. They even point it out, and it has another one of my favourite Capaldi jokes with the "no wonder they keep invading you" line. Gets me every time. I also really, really like all the stuff with Santa and the elves. It shows from the beginning that something's not quite right, and it does play heavily into the dreamscape feel of this episode, almost like it mixes Alien and A Nightmare on Elm Street. But honestly, my biggest issue with this episode is that it is so obviously structured as a farewell to Clara, with her basically taking centre stage throughout the story, that the fact she stays undermines it in my opinion. I think it could have been a better episode if she left and this was a new companion joining. Still though, great episode, 8 out of 10. So that was Series 8, and up now is the ratings for each episode. And I don't hate this series, it's definitely the weakest of the first 10, no questions asked. And it's just got so many episodes which are just around the average mark to bad. But also some really good ones that I think people overlook a lot of the times, especially stuff such as Time Heist. I think that was just a really fun episode. Then we switch over to the rankings, and yeah, as you can see, the top half are all really positive. I really like those episodes, but especially at the start of the series, it doesn't start off very great, and a couple of times when it seems like it's getting better and better, the show just dips very significantly with a couple of episodes. So yeah, Series 8 wasn't exactly the best start for Capaldi, and when it comes to ratings, the show really started to drop off here. And I can see why, but I don't think this series deserves the hate it gets. It's just very underwhelming at points. Up next is Series 9, and personally, I know this series has a very mixed reception, but I think it's a massive improvement on Series 8. As I've stated a few times before, I'm a big fan of two-parters. I love two-parter stories, so the fact that most of this series is set up of just two-parters really speaks to me personally, and after so many series of not really getting them, it's cool to see so many at once. I also really like the relationship between the Doctor and Clara in this series, where it's basically like they're just friends now, they're no longer travelling companions, so Clara's not even in every episode, which I think is pretty cool, and it almost makes it like a companion light series in some aspects. I like that. I'm also quite into the recurring narrative of the hybrid, but I do think that it's stated so many times in this series, it's no shock it became a meme on TARDIS posting. So yeah, Series 9, I'd say it's definitely better, but let's see if I can justify that by going into the actual episodes themselves. First up is The Magician's Apprentice and The Witch's Familiar, and honestly I think it's the first time the Daleks were done true justice throughout the Stephen Moffat era. I love all the stuff at the start where Missy and the Clara are basically trying to figure out what the hell's going on with the Doctor, and Unit are very confused. Basically every scene that has Michelle Gomez in this two-parter is just gold to me. I really love her that much. I also love all the flashback stuff with Davros as a kid, and it really does finally answer that question from the Fourth Doctor's era of, do I have the right? I also just love the general relationship between the Doctor and Davros. It's really cool to see how different these characters are, but how much they almost kind of respect each other in a way. They hate each other's guts and want to see the other one destroyed, but there is a mutual respect between them for how long they've been battling each other, and I love to see that. Clara's also really good in this episode. I think it's cool how she's not really a companion at this point, and it does highlight how much the impact of Series 8 is important. I still think that it undermines Last Christmas, but it's still pretty cool to see, I'm not gonna lie. I like how different she acts in this series compared to the last one. However, the biggest issue of this episode is that there is a lot of just talking. Despite the fact it's a Dalek story, there's not really much Dalek action in it. It's more just a lot of dialogue, explaining backstories, explaining character relations, and that's all good. But when you've got Daleks, maybe do something with the, Daleks. I still think it's a great couple of episodes though, and a solid start to the series, so for me, it's an 8 out of 10. For our second two-part story of Series 9, we have Under the Lake and Before the Flood. Now, this two-parter is a weird one for me. I really love the first episode. I think it's truly incredible, terrifying, usual base and prestige stuff, but with ghosts. What's not to love there? I also really like all the supporting characters. I think they're very interesting. I really like the dynamic with the deaf girl. I think that's just cool to put into the show. It's not needed, but it's just cool to see, in my opinion, so I like all that stuff. I also like the Doctor and Clara's relationship, where they've basically almost turned into a bickering married couple, which I kind of like, but without all the usual melodrama of like the Doctor and companion are in love relationship. And I think it works really well for them, just kind of like caring about each other a lot, but also very passive aggressive. I do kind of like it. And all the stuff with the ghost is really cool. It's really creepy, definitely like very horror levels of stuff. And the second half is where a lot of it falls apart, in my opinion. I'm not the biggest fan of all the stuff with the sarcophagus and all the timey-wimey stuff. I'm also not the biggest fan of the area that they filmed it. I think it just looks very bland and boring. And the Fisher King itself, even though it's a cool design and its growls are voiced by Corey Taylor of Slipknot, that's all cool and everything, but he doesn't actually do much in the context of the story, apart from basically being a Resident Evil boss. Now, for me, the first half is really top tier Doctor Who. The second half, it's not bad, but I just don't think there's much to it apart from the conclusion. So, for this two-parter, I'm going to give a 7.5 out of 10. That reaches our third two-part story with The Girl Who Died / The Woman Who Lived. Now, I know that these episodes can be seen separately, but personally I think you'd be very confused if you only watch the second half without watching the first half. And overall, I think the stories do overlap in many places with so many references to the previous episode that it feels enough for a two-part story in my opinion. If you have a different one, that's completely understandable, but no matter what, these two episodes would have been rated the same anyway, because they're both kind of boring. I like a lot of the character elements. I actually quite like Me. I know a lot of people in the fanbase don't, but I think she's a very interesting concept. Someone like Captain Jack who can't hold the memories and loses her personality. He's pretty depressing, but also really cool. I also like all the stuff with Odin and the weird robot-y things. I think that's all pretty neat. And for the second half, I like the lion guy. No, his effects look terrible, but as a villain, I do find him at least a bit threatening. However, everything else of this two-part just falls apart for me. I don't like the settings of either story, which is a massive shame because I'm actually a big fan of historicals when it comes to Doctor Who. But for some reason, both these settings just seem really bland and cheap to me. I also don't like the way that Me changes so much between the first half and the second half. I know that like a lot of years have gone by, but it's practically a brand new character. And as interesting as that is to explore with the fact that she does lose all her memories over and over again, it just kind of cancels out the point of caring about her much, because we may like this Me, but the next time we see her we might not, so what's the point in getting attached? Now, there's just so many like little issues of this story that really compound up, with the main issue being that they're both very padded and very boring to me. So for these ones, I'm going to give them a 4 out of 10. Up next, we have the Zygon Invasion and the Zygon Inversion. Now, this is a two-parter that I love. I'm a big fan of the Zygons. I think the idea of them is pretty cool, especially with how they're basically a giant metaphor for stuff such as immigration. That's all really cool to me, and I think this two-parter handles it very, very well. All the stuff with the Doctor and Unit is really cool. I love how many twists this episode has. All the stuff with Clara / Bonnie, that is so good. Jenna Coleman does such an incredible job throughout this entire two-parter as both characters, that you can tell something's wrong with Clara straight away but can't fully figure out what it is. Unless, of course, you already know how the Zygons work. And I love that. I also love how this episode basically has Osgood as a companion. And I'm a big fan of Osgood, so all that stuff is really cool to me. And of course, the actual plan itself is pretty cool and definitely relates to stuff such as terrorism, both domestic and international terrorism. And I think it does really help the story to be grounded in modern day in a way that Doctor Who sometimes doesn't do. And this time it hits a political issue and hits it right on the head and does it perfectly, in my opinion. Then of course we can't not mention the ending to this story. Capaldi's speech is breathtaking. He is such an incredible actor. It's no wonder basically that from this point on they just keep giving him speeches almost every episode, and I don't mind even slightly. Now, when it comes to my issues of this episode, it is completely down to that scene at the church where the military guys are like, hey, these guys can shapeshift into anyone. Then they shapeshift into their family members and they're like, oh my god, that's my actual family member, what are you doing here? It's so stupid. They're so well trained, and it really does take me out of the moment and really annoy me. But apart from that one scene, everything else about this is incredible. Solid 9 out of 10. Time for our first solo episode with Sleep No More. And if you've ever been on the internet, you know that this episode isn't exactly great, and I kind of agree with that. Personally, I really have to say I love the found footage format. I think it's done so well. I also think it's really clever how over time they start seeing stuff from other people's point of view who don't have the cameras, showing that something is definitely up. It's something I noticed in my first watch and a lot of other people didn't, and I think that just shows how well it's done. It's very subtle, and they don't point it out until the end. I also love all the stuff with Mr. Sandman, the actual corporation stuff, and then the biggest issue of this episode is the biggest issue that's with a lot of found footage stuff. It's very slow, very tedious, very boring, and we don't see much that goes on. I still think it's an interesting experiment, but it just doesn't hit it at all. It's very dull, and because of that I have to give it a 5 out of 10. For our second and technically last solo episode of this series, it's Face for Raven. I will openly state, Clara's death is heartbreaking. Not going to deny that. Her getting brought back later on down the line really contradicts it, as I'll state in a little bit. No, it's done brilliantly. Her accepting her failure, her trying to be the Clara, and the Doctor being the Doctor. She doesn't seem to understand, and didn't understand throughout her tenure, that she can't be the Doctor. And I think that really falls her downfall and works so well for the characters. However, I do think there's a reason that when it comes to this episode, people only really point out that scene, and it's because the rest of it is very standard. The only reason why it's overly notable is that it's episode 10 and it suddenly kills off a companion. But everything else about the episode is boring. I don't care too much about this hidden room. Why would the Cybermen who have no emotions want to hide from humanity and all that stuff? It's just a bit bland, but that ending, brilliant. Solid 7 out of 10. Up next, a lot of people are going to hate me because I've ranked these two together, and it's Heaven Sent and Hell Bent. Now, obviously, Heaven Sent, absolutely incredible. It's a time loop episode, but you don't know it's a time loop episode, and Capaldi monologues for about 50 minutes. It is truly some of the greatest television that the show has ever put out, no questions asked. And the second half with Hell Bent, I know a lot of people have big issues with it, and yeah, that's all I'm actually saying on Heaven Sent, because there's nothing else to say. It's just that incredible. Personally though, I do like Hellbent as well. I don't get the big negative reception for it online. I think it's not as good as Heaven Sent, but not much other things could be as good as Heaven Sent. So maybe start looking a bit down on your expectations when it comes to this part. I still think it does a lot of characterisation for the Doctor, where they don't want to accept loss, which is something that the character has had since the first Doctor. So personally, I really like that aspect. I get that it doesn't overly fit in with Heaven Sent, of him trying to let her go, but he didn't fully let her go by the end of that story, so I think it's okay. As well as all the stuff with the Time Lords, I think is pretty neat. I love the idea of the vault thingy, where they basically tie up their greatest enemies to protect it. That's cool to me. Very terrifying, and shows just how dodgy the Time Lords are, because they are a very corrupt organisation. The only issue I honestly have is the ending. I really don't like the diner scene. I love the acting between Capaldi and Coleman. I think the Doctor and the Clara, rest in peace, do a brilliant job throughout this. But the issue is it just doesn't impact me much, because their friendship was so rocky. And I think them doing such a big send-off didn't really work in the character's favour. Even so, incredible two-parter in my opinion, 9.5 out of 10. For our last story of Series 9, I've included The Husbands of River Song, because personally I think it does work quite well to fit in with Series 9's focus on loss and death. So for this story, we have River coming back, and her and Capaldi have such amazing chemistry. I am still sad to this day. This is the only time they appear on screen together in this episode. I also really love the plot, all the stuff that we see with River basically doing what River does, but seeing it from the Doctor's perspective. That's really cool because a lot of times we don't really see what River does, we see the aftermath. So seeing her actually do all these really dodgy deals and all these criminal underthings, and of course the ending, How Long is the Night in Beryllium, oh, that hits me so hard. Honestly, my only real issue with this episode is that Nardole isn't very important to it, despite the fact it being a major character going forward. But apart from that, it's one of the most heartbreaking endings for a companion. Solid 9 out of 10. And that is Series 9. Overall, I'd say it's definitely an improvement on both the past two series. It's still a little bit mixed at some points. I really love the idea of a two-part structure, and as you can see right here with my ratings, overall the two-parters are really good apart from one, which most people don't even count as a two-parter. And when we change it over to the rankings, it's basically all two-parters at the top, with the only two-parter being at the bottom, once again being the one that most people wouldn't count as one anyway. So yeah, it's just a really good idea. I just wish that a couple of the ideas were thought through more. Like, Face the Raven was obviously only built for its finale, and all that other stuff. So, anyway, still a great series, and definitely a step up from the last two, but there's definite room for improvement, and the next series definitely does that improvement. Series 10. What else really can be said apart from the redeemer of the Moffat era and especially of the Capaldi era? Now, I know some people for some reason take issue with Bill for being a lesbian, completely ignoring the fact that all the other straight companions have had massive melodrama with relationships. But no, I just really love Series 10. I think it goes back to the consistency of Series 1 and Series 4. It's definitely one of my favourites, as there's not even a single episode that I fully dislike. There's one that I'm not a fan of, and one that I'll usually skip, but apart from that single episode, everything else throughout this awesome series is so damn fun to watch. I also adore Pearl Mackie as Bill. I think she's one of the best companions the show's ever had for just how normal she is. And, you know, Matt Lucas as Nardole is a brilliant addition, with Capaldi really shining throughout this series, taking on a more mentor role compared to his more mental breakdown role. But, yep, let's just get into the episodes, because I really do love this series. For our first episode, we have the return of Dr. Mysterio, which is, yes, technically a Christmas special, but it also really fits into this series quite well, whilst also capping off Series 9 with a couple of references. Now, when it comes to this special, it needs to be acknowledged that Doctor Who wasn't on the air for a whole year by the time this special came out, so I think there was a lot of hype going into it, and a lot of people got disappointed because of that, and I completely understand, but you are wrong. Now, this episode's not incredible, it's very cheesy, very Christmassy, very happy-go-lucky with random aliens, but when it comes to the characters and the comedy, this episode nails it. I hadn't watched this episode since its release until a couple of weeks ago, and oh my god, it is so funny. It's absolutely brilliant. The plot is appalling, but every character and every comedy line in this episode hits so well, it's easily forgivable. It's a solid 7 out of 10 for me. For the first proper episode of Series 10, we have the pilot. Now, originally, I was going to rate this episode lower, but upon rewatch, it's actually a really good episode. Everything throughout the series is established very subtly, without you even really noticing so much that it distracts you from the story. And when it comes to the story itself, it's a good one. It's usual Doctor Who-y sci-fi stuff, but has that weird twist partway towards the ending, which I really enjoy. The fact there's no real villains in this episode. Of course, we also can't forget how amazing 12 is throughout this episode with Peter Capaldi, and of course Nardole, and then Bill. Instantly lovable in my opinion. I love everything to do with Bill. The fact that was basically an underachiever, that is actually very intelligent, and he sees so much potential in her. Now, I love their relationship. This is a good episode, a solid 8 out of 10. For the second episode, we have Smile, and once again, I see this as an episode a bit like The Return of Dr. Mysterio, that people basically watched the trailer and said, I'm out. Those people are so wrong. Yes, the emoji bots are very cringy at some points, and it is a massive detraction from the episode. But the overall story, absolutely awesome. Bill is fleshed out so much in this with how she reacts to stuff with all the sci-fi concepts, how she reacts to the Doctor, the moral choices that you have to make as a companion. All that is brill. I also really like some of the supporting cast, like the kid who isn't actually annoying somehow. And the actual, swarm things, creepy as hell. Love it. And after a while, you do get sort of used to the emoji bots with them being cute at certain moments. But yeah, great episode. Solid 8 out of 10 once again. That leads on to the third episode with Thin Ice, and I think it's a little bit less good than the first two, but still good. Of course, this episode is mostly famous for the Doctor punching a racist, and that scene alone would have given this episode a 10 out of 10 if that was the whole episode. Just the Doctor keep punching a racist in the face. But when it comes to the actual story, I do like it, but I almost feel like this episode should have been a two-parter. There's a lot of cogs in this machine when it comes to the plot of this episode. And a lot of them just feel very brushed aside, like the homeless kids are just kind of brushed aside. The horrific rich guy exploiting people and knowing that they're going to die is kind of brushed aside as well. I just don't think it has enough room to breathe at times. But the overall concept is awesome. I love the actual kind of whale thing itself, and the setting is beautiful. I also love the fact they acknowledge Bill's race, which is something that they needed to do more with Martha. But yeah, it's still a good episode, solid 7 out of 10 for me. Fourth episode is Knock Knock, and this is when the series really starts to take off for me. I honestly love Knock Knock. It's almost like a kind of Hammer horror film, but done in the style of Doctor Who, a bit like some of the classic serials from series 12 to season 14. That's really cool to me. I love how just there's so much mystery surrounding it. The Doctor's relationship with Bill is also done really well. I like a lot of Bill's friends, even if they are kind of dicks. But they're kind of the likeable dicks that I've made friends with throughout uni. I love you guys. Please don't get mad that I called you lovable dicks. And then there's just so much more to the episode. All the stuff with the relationship between the mother and the son. Heartbreaking. All that stuff with the house looks beautiful. I love the episode's design. It's so pretty, but yet so creepy. My only real issue with this episode is that I feel like it could have been a few minutes longer just to expand more on the mother and son thing. But apart from that, it's awesome as this episode. 9 out of 10. Up next is Oxygen, and this episode has some amazing commentary. Now, I know a lot of people take issue with this episode for how anti-capitalist it is, but personally I don't see it as anti-capitalist, more anti what capitalism could become down the line. And with that subtlety, I do actually quite like it, and I think the kind of political message in this episode is subtle enough that it's still clever without being too obvious, which is something that won't be true further on down the line. I also love the setting. It's so creepy, it's so empty, it's so dead. Like, this is one of the few times in Doctor Who that I truly feel that they are alone in space, and it works really well. Of course, the Doctor going blind is also brilliant. All the stuff with Bill and Nardole is also incredible, with Nardole finally being a proper companion. My only real downside to this episode is that the supporting characters are very forgettable. I don't really remember what any of them did, and that does really let the episode down, but it's still a great episode and another solid 8 out of 10. Now it's time for a 3-part story, our first one in a very long time, and currently most recent one. So Extremis and Pyramid at the End of the World and Lie of the Land are sometimes counted as 3 separate episodes for some reason. I don't understand that at all, because if you watched any of them without watching the others, you would be very confused or wanting to see the ending of the story. The first episode, Extremis, is truly outstanding for this series. Everything about it just feels off. I don't even know how they did it, but when I was first watching it before I even knew the twist, something felt off about the episode. I didn't really realise what it was, but I was intrigued to find out what it was. I think it might have even been like the way they shot it, the camera angles being a lot more static than usual, but Oh, it was done so well. That twist is brilliant. And I love the rest of the episode. All the stuff with Bill getting walked in on by the Pope after saying if there was anything wrong with being a lesbian, there'd be a sign. Makes me wet myself every time. It's so funny. It's one of my favourite jokes in the whole show. And pretty much everything else to do with Extremists is just perfect. And the twist is so good. If I was doing these episodes separately, Extremists would be a 10 out of 10. But then we get to Pyramid at the End of the World, and I still like this episode. I still think it's a great episode, but it has one of those hell-bent problems where, because the first one was so good, it could never live up to it. And this episode, as great as it is, and it really does flesh out the mummy people, whatever they're called, the monks, it's very talky. Not much actual action happens in this episode. It's more people talking about the events. And personally, I can appreciate that. I think it's quite cool to do that for a 3-part story. But I know a lot of people took issue with it, and I completely understand why. Especially with how sidelined our main cast feel throughout the story until the ending. Then finally, when it comes to Lie of the Land, I think it's such a disappointment. After the first 2 episodes did such a great job, Lie of the Land, despite being a 3-parter and the second episode being rather slow at times, seems to cram in 2 episodes worth of content, and it's so rushed. It's difficult to keep up really with what's happening at times, especially with all the stuff on the boat. The Doctor's fake regeneration is also very annoying in my opinion, and Bill, as great as she is, she just seems very out of her depth throughout the whole episode. Whilst in the first 2 she seemed very comfortable being in these dangerous situations, this one she seems very out of it. Nardole basically does nothing, and the ending is basically just the Leaf thing that Clara did in Series 7. Yeah, overall I do like this 3-part, but the ending really does ruin it for me quite significantly. So overall I have to give it a 7 out of 10. I just wish the ending was better. For our 8th story, we have Empress of Mars, and I'll be honest, it's not a great story. I love all the stuff with the British basically trying to take over Mars. I think that's just kind of funny and a good jab at colonisation. All the stuff with the Ice Warriors, once again, I'm a huge Ice Warrior fan and a big Matt Gaetz fan, so seeing them both on another episode, that's really cool to me, especially after Cold War. I also love how in this episode, specifically, they show that there's good and bad Ice Warriors, because in the classics, the Ice Warriors were a very difficult monster, due to the fact that they did change. But everything else about this episode, especially its pacing, feels really boring. I don't like the main villain at all. He's just too dislikable to actually be realistic. And overall, as cool as the Queen's design is, she doesn't do much. It's like introducing something that they didn't really care about. I still think it's a good episode, but I'm gonna have to give it a 7 out of 10, and I can't give it any higher or any lower. Now we reach the only episode of this series that I think is kind of boring, like very boring, and that's Theatres of Light. I really appreciate all the stuff that they did with the Romans and Bill. All those scenes are really cool. I also really like the Doctor and Nardole dealing with the more indigenous people. I think it's to Scotland. And then the rest of it, I just don't like. There's nothing inherently bad about this episode, it's just very middle of the road. Whilst at some other points, especially that ending, it's just very cliched, very cheesy, not very entertaining as well. You're just kind of watching it and waiting for it to end. Like I said, it's not a bad episode, but I wouldn't even say it's an average episode, so it's gotta be a 4 out of 10. Kind of a shame too, since it's written by someone who wrote from the classic series. Now we reach the 2-part finale of the Capaldi era, and this part is actually going to be really short compared to some of my other review bits that I've done, because all I'll say for this 2-parter is it is the best series finale of the whole 13 series run so far. It hits me so hard throughout the whole thing. Capaldi is incredible throughout start to end. Everything with Missy and the Master, brilliant. All the stuff with Bill, amazing. Nardole's exit is heartbreaking with him learning how to care about people again. I love the supporting characters in both halves of the story, especially like the little farmyard group, basically just being the antithesis of just the small nobodies that the Doctor would lay their life down to, because nobody is unimportant. The cyber designs, bringing back all the classic ones, mixing them with the brand new ones, and just all the stuff to do with that last 10 minutes, with the Doctor pleading the Master and Missy to stay with him. I can't sing this episode's praises enough. I watch it at least once a year since its release, and I nearly cry every single time. It is the best finale for the modern era, and it's a 10 out of 10. Then finally, for the last episode of Series 10, we have Twice Upon a Time. I don't get why people hate this episode. I get some of the criticisms for the first Doctor being a bit more sexist, but watching those classic serials, he was quite sexist. So I personally don't mind. I think it was just the mindset of the time. And no, it's not acceptable to modern day standards, but at the time that wouldn't have even been blinked at. And I think the episode represents that quite well. Then on to all the other stuff, absolutely outstanding. The ending makes me cry like a little baby. All the stuff with Bill coming back and basically saying her proper goodbyes is awesome. Clara's cameo, Nardol's cameo, all the stuff with Rusty coming back from Capaldi's first series, the Brigadier's great uncle, all the stuff with the First World War, heartbreaking. No, I love this story. I love the fact there's no real villain. And yeah, all the stuff like the mainframe, really cool. It's another 10 out of 10. So that's Series 10. Overall, it's one of my favourite series of the show, with only one episode being the outlier. As you can see from the ratings, it's pretty damn consistent apart from one, and when we change it over to the rankings, yeah, there's literally just one episode that's rated at 6 or below. Now, this is a series which is basically completely standalone, and I love that, and I think it really works in its favour, kind of being a soft reboot, but without it being so rebooty, it has to ignore everything else. I love this series, it's great. I can't say the same for the next one. Series 11. This series has problems, and I don't think anyone can really deny it. Now, I'm going to state right off the bat, I think a female Doctor is one of the best decisions the show has made. I'm shocked it didn't happen sooner. I know that it was thrown about for either the 5th or 6th Doctors originally, but they ended up not going for it, and I think that's a shame. Jodie Whittaker genuinely does the best that she's given, and it really shows how well her acting talent is to elevate any of the material she's in. But trying to elevate a pile of shit is still trying to elevate a pile of shit. And when it comes to the companions, Tosin Cole is the worst companion with Ryan. He's the worst companion in the show's history, and that includes Adric and Katarina. Yaz doesn't do anything in this series and only really starts to become a character in series 12 and 13, with Graham being the only real highlight, but I think that's mostly because Bradley Walsh also can elevate anything like Jodie Whittaker can. No, I have some very strong issues with this series, but it still does have a couple of highlights despite what most people say, so let's just get straight into the episodes. First up is The Woman Who Fell to Earth, and I honestly do think it's a decent start to the era. A lot of the plot is pretty bad at times, and is driven heavily by plot contrivance and just random plot holes and all that stuff. But I will say that I do like Jodie's Doctor in this episode. I think she's immediately just clicks with the character. I don't like how nervous she is at times, but overall I think it's a really good performance and shows very quickly that yes, women can play the Doctor. Please shut up, Reddit nerds. Also, when it comes to the companions, since I'm only looking at these episodes separately instead of a bigger picture, I think they're all pretty decent in this episode. They don't do much, but their presence is definitely felt a lot more here than later on down the line, and I do appreciate that, with Grace being an actually really good supporting character. And honestly, Tim Shaw is actually a really cool villain. I like Tim Shaw. I think he's neat. But the plot is really just there. It drags it down a lot. So this episode's going to be a 7 out of 10. Second episode is The Ghost Monument, and honestly, when I first started watching this series back when it first came out, I genuinely tapped out with this episode for about 6 months. Yeah, The Ghost Monument is one of those episodes where you can't call it awful because it achieves exactly what it set out to be, but that thing isn't very good. All the companions are completely sidelined throughout most of the episode, with basically no character for any of them, despite the fact there's 3 of them, so a lot of characters should be bouncing off each other. Jodie's doctor in this episode is very bland, making up random rules left, right and centre, like the no gun policy, which is not a policy of the Doctor. They've used guns on multiple occasions. The supporting characters are bland, and there's so many plot setups in this episode that lead to nothing. Like, what's the point in the river being acidic if that doesn't lead to anything? No, this episode's bad. I can't call it appalling, just because I really do love the visuals, and that's kind of it. It's a 3 out of 10. Up next is Rosa, and it's definitely one of the first highlights, but personally I don't think it's as good as many people say. The companions are once again heavily sidelined, with only one scene focusing on race between Ryan and just how horrific it was back in the 1950s. I do love Jodie's doctor in this episode. She's very moral throughout it, and I really agree with a lot of the points that she makes. And I think overall it starts to show just how well she can play the Doctor when given the right material. And yep, now it's time for Time Racist. It's the worst villain I think I've ever seen in any Doctor Who history. He's just so bland. His only goal in this episode is to be racist. He has no character. I know nothing about this guy, except he can't shoot guns, and he's a racist. So I have to give the episode a 6 because of that one thing. This should have just been a historical episode, and it might have been a 10. Speaking of episodes with potential that ended up just being really bad, Arachnids in the UK is a weird episode. Personally, I love me some Trump banter. That orange-haired fucker can just get fucked. But I don't want to see that in Doctor Who, or if I do, I want to see actual clever commentary, not someone basically doing a goddamn SNL sketch throughout the whole episode. On top of that, I do really love the spiders in this episode. I love the concept of this episode of the spiders spreading out because of some chemical testing. Very fun sci-fi stuff and plays into the corrupt politician/businessman. But everything to do with the Doctor in this episode and the companions is so bad. They counteract themselves so often. The Doctor's moral compass is also destroyed in this episode, aka, let's not kill the animals quickly, let's lock them in a room and make them eat each other and suffer. This episode just isn't good, but I do love the spider stuff. So I'm going to have to give this episode a 4 out of 10. It's below average. Speaking of, could have been worse, but could have also been a lot better, the Saranga Conundrum. I like all the characters in this one for once. Not our main cast, but I love all the supporting characters, especially the pregnant man who made me laugh. I also really like the Pating. I think it's really cute. I think that as a design of a Doctor Who monster, it can be quite funny. And when that guy exploded, I actually felt sad because he had a character, which was nice. But then everything else about the episode is bad. Once again, the Doctor just seems a bit off. All the stuff with the companions is really, really bad once again. And I don't see why they keep treating the Pating like it's this giant, terrifying monster, but it's a tiny little thing. I don't get if that's meant to be, like, funny. This one's not great. It's another 4 out of 10 from me. Then we reach the proper highlight of this series, in my opinion, with Demons of the Punjab. And yes, I've seen the Fall of Doctor Who video. I can see all the complaints to this episode. But personally, I still think it's a good one. The Doctor really starts to come into her own under Jodie Whittaker, and I think she does play very well in this episode for the more awkward thing that they were trying to go, and it does work quite well for the story. I also think that Yaz does have quite a lot to do in the episode. I know some people say that she's very sidelined, but personally I think all she needed to do was just have that connection with her grandma back in time, and that's what we get, and it works very well. Ryan is once again just also there, as is Graham, but I honestly really love the story of these things wanting to help, to basically pay respects to the dead. Yes, they could have done it a bit better by not threatening to kill people, I still love the story, I still think it's very heartwarming, and I think it shines a massive light on a part of history I genuinely didn't know about. So for me, it's a 7 out of 10. And after peaking, the series hits a massive low point. Kablam is literally 50 minutes of the Doctor shilling for a company and saying that people who want to improve the company are bad guys. Yes, the guy wanting to improve the company was also a psycho, but telling him that he was wrong and the system isn't the problem. Why are you shilling for a big corpo, and why do you never question anything to do with the worker abuse throughout this episode? Everything about this, on surface level, looks like a really good Doctor Who episode. But just by thinking for a few seconds, everything falls apart. None of the characters are great. All the companions do fuck all once again. Everything in this story is completely contrived and just, oh, we need to find this guy. There's like 1 billion people here. Oh, it's the first person Graham meets. This episode is so trash. I once again nearly stopped watching when I decided to catch up. It's a 2 out of 10. Then we reach the Witchfinders. Now, I've seen a lot of people online dislike this episode, but personally I think it's quite fun. Alan Cumming as King James is obviously brilliant and definitely a highlight of the episode, but a lot of the other stuff is really fun too. I love the Moraks. They're just so stupid, but in that fun Doctor Who way. Jodie also really shows off as a Doctor in this episode, especially compared to the last one. I think Ryan also does a pretty good job in this episode, and it's the first one where he actually feels like a proper companion, which is nice. Graham also has some fun moments, and Yaz really starts to show her sympathetic side, which would be used on and off again in the future. Now, I think it's a good episode, but it does fall into the same kind of issues of lots of sonicking, lots of big expedition dumps, and just the regular boring nature of this series, but I'd still say it's a good one. It's another 7 out of 10 from me. And time for another fall in my ratings, because It Takes You Away is trash. It's a story about a goddamn horrific single father who leaves his daughter in the woods thinking there's monsters out there that may have killed him, so he can go visit his dead wife through a magic portal that's in their mirror that also goes through like a weird dimensional portal thing where it has things that eat you, and there's this random man living in it. It doesn't make any sense. All the stuff set in our reality is awful. All the stuff set in that like little red part of reality, awful. The only positives to this episode that really do massively jump it up in quality is all the stuff with the Little Pocket Universe. I love that concept. I love seeing Grace come back. All the stuff where it turns into a frog and the Doctor talks to it, I think that's really funny. I love all that stuff, but the first 30 minutes of this episode is awful. It's a 4 out of 10. Now, speaking of awful, we have the Battle of Ranskor of Kolos, and this is the worst series finale so far by a wide margin. Honestly, everything about this episode, all the characters are complete trash. People change their minds and opinions completely depending on what the plot needs them to do. All the stuff with like, oh, if you take off these relay things and the planet can affect your brain, and it never plays a point in the episode. It's like I'm watching the Ghost Monument again. Also, stealing planets, we've seen it before and we've seen it done better, and the CG in this episode is so dodgy. It's like they ran out of budget because of how good the first 9 episodes looked, that they're like, oh crap, we've got a final one. Shove whatever else you can find in it. It looks awful. The only positive to this episode, genuinely, is Zim Shah / Tim Shaw. I think he's a great villain. I think he's very menacing. I'd like to see him come back. Everything else, though, about this episode can get in the bin. It's a 2 out of 10. And finally, for Series 11, we have Resolution, also known as Resolution of the Daleks. And I think it's good. I know a lot of people take issue with this episode for how different the Daleks seem, but personally I can forgive that because it is like a reconnaissance Dalek. It is a different kind, a bit like the cult of Skara. Daleks are scary, that's the entire point of them, and now they've been taken to the next level where they can literally control your body without you wanting them to. That's terrifying in my opinion. I think it's done so well, both the voice acting from Nicholas Briggs, as well as all the acting from the lead actress in that episode. I can't remember her name, but she is brilliant. And you may have noticed that I've spent most of this mini review talking all about the Dalek. It's because the Doctor and her fam are useless in this episode, and I hate Ryan's dad. Not in the way the show wants me to, I just don't like any of these scenes. I think it's very boring and I don't care. But yeah, for the Dalek alone, and all that stuff surrounding it, this episode's a 7 out of 10. I really enjoy all that stuff. And yeah, that's series 11. A big problem in my opinion, and definitely the worst series so far, and that includes series 12 and 13. I think this is definitely the worst one. There's no real structure to the series, and I get it's meant to be mostly standalone episodes, but it just doesn't feel right. It feels generic and boring and like any other Monster of the Week show, with the main cast being pretty bad at certain points, not from any fault of their own, but the writing in this episode is terrible. So, as you can see, I've got the scores up right now, and when we change them around to the rankings, like so, yeah, it's not great. There's only 4 7 out of 10s, then a 6, and everything else is negative. Mostly a negative series, the first one, yeah. And I think it's a damn shame, because the first female Doctor does deserve better. Yeah, bad season. It does slightly improve with the next one, so let's get to it. Now, Series 12 is a mixed season from me. I think it has some of the best episodes of this era, but also 1000% has some of the worst. The 13th Doctor does seem a little bit better in this series by trying to give her a character arc, but so much of that character arc is off screen, so it's kind of difficult to care. Ryan is also as useless as before, and Graham's a bit more boring, with Yaz taking a bit more of personality, but by this point, Yaz was still my least favourite companion of all time. That does change with Series 13, but yeah, it's just kind of a bit more of Series 11, but with more, well, fan moments more than anything. I honestly don't have much else to say. It's just a bit dull is Series 12, and, you know, let's just get straight into it and you'll see what I mean. So the series opens on a 2-parter, which does make me happy, and Spyfall overall I think is quite a good story. The first half is definitely better than the second half, and the first half is definitely very interesting. All the stuff with figuring out that, yeah, so-and-so's the Master. I like all the stuff where it's basically a bit like a James Bond film. The parts where all the characters go undercover I think is great, and gives them all really good personality moments, which reflects them very well. I also kind of like the main villain of this 2-parter. I think he's fun, even though he was never used ever again, which is weird because he's not properly defeated. And of course, that ending with Sacha Dhawan's Master, I honestly think he's a really good Master. I just wish that he was in better episodes, because the second half, which mostly features him, does fall apart in some places. I love all the historical stuff. I'm a big sucker for, like, anything with Nazis basically getting told to fuck off. So I love all the stuff that takes place in Nazi Germany. I think it's really cool, and I love how accurate some parts of it are. I also quite like a lot of the stuff with the Tham, surprisingly, where they're separated. I think that's really cool. But when it comes to the second half, literally everything from, you know, that scene of now they'll see the real you, where the Doctor tries to get the Master put in a concentration camp, all the way to the ending, just falls apart. The ending of the episode is literally like, you can't defeat me, Doctor, and then the Doctor's like, yeah, I can, and like, Sonic something, and then they've won. Also, the Master gets trapped in a place, and that's just never acknowledged again. No, Spyfall started off really well. It does fall apart a bit, but I still say it's quite a good 2-parter to start with, so it's a 7 out of 10 from me. Now it's time for everyone's favourite episode. It's Orphan 55. Yeah, Orphan 55 is trash. It is appalling. Everything about the episode is truly horrific. All the characters are terrible. The plot itself is nonsensical and feels like a 3-hour-long script that was suddenly thrusted into a 50-minute story. The amount of weird, weird political moments about the environment are really confusing. I'm someone who completely agrees we need to stop global warming. I'm a massive environmentalist, so this episode should speak right to me. But it's so badly handled, with the Doctor basically giving a bloody PowerPoint presentation at the end. The only reason this episode is not a 1 out of 10 for how abysmal it is the Benny lady, because it's so bad it's funny. It's a 2 out of 10. Up next is Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror, and this is probably the first episode of this era that I actually genuinely enjoy. Not with any ifs or buts, I just think it's a good story. Now, I'd known about Tesla before because I'm a big fan of Fallout, and that mentions Nikola Tesla quite a lot, so I learnt about him from there. But I still think it's quite cool how this man did basically dream up the 21st century and no one knows him. I also really love this stuff with Edison, where they don't make him an outright villain. That's really cool to me, how they do have a kind of grey area where he explains his side, which is nice and something this era needed to do more. Nikola Tesla himself is really cool throughout the episode, and the Doctor's speech to the Skifra, telling her that no one will remember you after you're dead, is an incredible Doctor speech. I love how dark Jodie gets. The only real issue with this episode is all the companion stuff. By like the third time they said, Tesla's done this, well, it does really start to get irritating. But I still think it's a great story, and I think it's a massive highlight from this era, so for me, it's an 8 out of 10. Up next is most people's favourite episode of this era, and for me, Fugitive of the Judoon falls flat in many places. I really do like the story of the Judoon hunting for a fugitive. I think a lot of that stuff's cool, even if it's less good than Smith and Jones, where the Judoon were first introduced. But for me, everything falls apart the moment the Doctor finds the TARDIS shaped like a police box. Because as much as I'm trying really hard to not connect this episode to future ones, this episode is such a massive setup for the finale. I can't not acknowledge it. And trust me, I'll get to that when we reach that episode. I also don't like Jack's cameo. I love the fact that Jack suddenly appeared. It's really exciting. But he appears for 10 minutes, just explains what's going to happen with the 8th episode, and then leaves. Now, overall, I'd say it's an alright episode. For me, it's a 6 out of 10, but I don't get the huge praise it has online. Praxeus is the worst episode of the entire run of Doctor Who. This is appalling. All of the characters are one-dimensional. They have no personality, including our main cast. The Doctor is just like a Wikipedia explanation of the Doctor. The plot is awful. It jumps around to so many places, it's difficult to keep track of what's happening. The plastic message is so shoved. It's like a bad version of The Birds. In fact, no, The Birds 2. You don't even get to be compared to the original The Birds. And finally, the Asian lass who was so obviously bigged up as a companion, in my opinion, and then suddenly is a twist villain with practically no hints at that, and then she just dies the next second anyway. This is the worst storytelling in the show's history, and it is the first episode I am happily giving a 1 out of 10 to. Up next is Can You Hear Me? And once again, this is one of those episodes that I struggled with, especially during the Russell era at times, where I could highly appreciate what the episode was trying to do. I love all the commentary on mental health. As I said, I'm someone who suffers from mental health. I say it all the time because it's something I'm not ashamed of. And this episode does do that very well, but at times it almost feels a bit like a PSA about depression. I love all the stuff with the Celestials. I think they're really cool. That animated segment is beautiful. I want to see more of that. I think that's brilliant to look at. However, this episode does have the line, Doctor, this wall is covered in fingers, which This episode does have the line, Doctor, this wall is covered in fingers, and it's my favourite line in the show for being so horrific and just sums up the Chibnall era so much. Also, the Doctor doesn't care about your cancer, Graham. What the fuck? 5 out of 10. Up next is The Haunting of Villa Diodati, and it's where this era peaks. All the characters have personalities in this one. Graham cracks some great jokes in it, and it's so funny. Ryan actually has a personality where he bounces off other characters without just flirting with them, which, yes, is something Ryan does a lot, apparently. Yaz has some interesting insights into how things kinda suck, and Jodie as the Doctor is truly outstanding. That's not even mentioning the lone Cyberman. The most terrifying Cyberman that has appeared since, I'd say, Tomb of the Cyberman. The way he describes killing his family, it's terrifying, and I love the supporting characters of Mary Shelley and all that stuff. It does kind of write out some of the stuff from Big Finish, but I don't mind because this episode does it so well. I adore this story, everything about it is really good to me. The only issue is that there's some weird timey-wimey stuff that I don't fully understand, but it's a 9 out of 10. Now we reach Ascension of the Cybermen and the Timeless Children. So first, I'm going to avoid the elephant in the room and just go for the non-Timeless Child stuff. It's not good. It's a boring Cyberman story. Everything that the lone Cyberman was able to do in the previous episode is completely dullified, with scenes basically being copy and pasted from the previous one, but without any of the good writing. Yeah, all crap. All the companions in this one are so sidelined that they basically get a subplot so the Doctor can do the main plot. And Sacha Dhawan's Master is good, but he's nowhere near as good as the last episode because it's time to talk about the Timeless Children. Now, this plot point has been ripped apart online for a reason. It doesn't make any sense. How is River a Time Lord is question number 1. Number 2, we saw that the first Doctor got his TARDIS and then it changed into a police box. So you're telling me that Ruth Doctor also travelled back in time, happened to land in 1963, also happened to get a broken chameleon circuit, and then was like, do you know what, I'll keep this. And the Time Lord Society wasn't like, oh, that's weird, maybe we shouldn't let them do that a second time. Also, on top of all that, if they were the Timeless Child and Time Lord Society knew about that, why would they make them president for several years, and why would they give them so much responsibility and give them full access to the Matrix, which is all the stuff that happens in Classic Who? That's never acknowledged. It may sound like I'm talking very fast, it's because I am. It's because this plot point is one of the worst things to happen to the show. It makes absolutely no sense, diminishes the entire point of the character being a nobody outsider of the Time Lord Society. Jodie plays it horrifically. It's a fucking half an hour long PowerPoint in the second episode where I have to hear the word Tectayun more than I did Benny. This two-parter is appalling. It's one of the worst things to happen, but I appreciate they tried something new, which is the only reason it's not getting a 1 out of 10, because it's getting a 2 out of 10. So up next is Revolution of the Daleks, and honestly, I remember watching this the first time and really enjoying it, but on second rewatch, it's not as good as I remember. I really do like Yaz in this episode. I think she's a really good companion in this one for the first time, really. All the stuff with Ryan and Graham departing, I think that's sweet, but personally, I didn't care enough about the characters for it to hit me emotionally, and all the stuff about government, corruption, etc. The issue of this episode is genuinely, in my opinion, all down to the Doctor. I hate all the stuff in the prison for the fact it's basically swept under the rug in the first few minutes. All the stuff for her literally allowing Daleks to reign free on the entire planet just so she can stop a couple of bad ones that humans made. And all the stuff with killing that TARDIS. The Doctor is not the Doctor in this episode, and it ruins it heavily for me. So it's a 6 out of 10. Also, Jack's in it, but there's literally no reason for Jack to be in it. So, yeah, that's Series 12, and as you can see by the ratings, the fact that it's literally got a complete 5 out of 10 for the overall series really sums up my feelings on it. This is the biggest mixed bag the whole show has ever given us. I hate so many episodes, but I really like some of the episodes. This series has my least favourite of the entire run, and some of my favourites. Yeah, this series is weird. I'm glad that it cut out a couple of companions, and I'm just ready to head on to Flux now, I'll be honest. And now we reach the most current series of the show, with Flux. And Series 13 is quite a mixed bag once again, but I'd say it's massively a step up from Series 11 and Series 12. So when it comes to this series, I'll also be including the 2022 specials, like I did with Series 4 and Series 7 with their specials, and overall, I actually quite like this series, even if it has some major issues. I think Jodie's Doctor is very, very good compared to how she was portrayed in Series 11 and 12. I think the writing's definitely improved overall. Yeah, there's not much else to say apart from Flux is a giant serial, so I will be counting it as one story, not separate ones, despite the fact that War of the Sontarans and Village of the Angels are mostly standalone. But yeah, let's get straight into Flux. So when it comes to the story of Flux itself, it's a 6-part serial that went over 6 weeks. The first time the show had done a multi-part story to this level since the classic era, and it's quite close in its way to Series 16's The Key to Time and Series 23's Trial of a Time Lord storylines, with kind of standalone episodes that all really play into an overarching narrative. With the first part basically just being a glorified advert for the next 5 episodes, I do think overall the Halloween Apocalypse does do a good job at setting a lot of things up, but it's very, very cluttered. However, I do like new companion Dan, played by John Bishop. I think he does a really good job. Yaz is also immediately a lot more interesting than she was in the previous 2 series, and Jodie Whittaker does an incredible job as a Doctor throughout this. I also immediately love Carvanista and would love him to be a full-time companion later on down the line. And yeah, that's all I can really say about Halloween Apocalypse. It is basically just a 50-minute long this is what's coming next kind of story. And personally, I think that's fine for a multi-part story. Then we hit War of the Sontarans, and I really struggled with making this episode part of Flux because it is basically standalone. And I think it's a really good episode. Yes, the ending where suddenly this general guy is able to put all these bombs there in a minute is a bit stupid, and all the Sontarans going to the same spot at the same time to, feed, basically. That's a bit dumb. But everything else about the episode, I really do adore it. I love the fact that it's basically a companion light storyline, even if all the Flux stuff is a bit dull. But every single scene with Jodie in it is awesome. It really shows how good she can be as the Doctor when she's given the right material. I really think that the 13th Doctor shines in this episode, and it is easily my favourite of Flux. But with Once Upon a Time, I think it kind of starts to fall apart again. Now, I don't like the episode structure at all. I think it's too jumping around. Dan and Yaz basically have no real moments to them, and Vinder is focused on as if he was a real companion, which is a big issue for me, but I really like how they tried something new. It's very dreamlike, it's very weird. I do really appreciate that. I just think the overall story itself seemed like a big backstory for Vinder, more than an actual episode, which is nice, but he's only a supporting character, and I would have liked more focus on our main cast. Then, of course, we reach the other highlight of this series, which is Village of the Angels, and the first 50 minutes of this episode are awesome. I love all the stuff. It's written by the same woman who did The Haunting of Villa Diodati, so no wonder it's as good as it is. The Flux stuff does kind of annoy me at times because it really doesn't fit with the overall story, but everything else about this episode I really, really love for the first 40 minutes. I love Claire. I love Gibbs. I think they're great additions. I think they would have been better companions for the rest of this series, in all honesty. The Angels are terrifying once again, and all the stuff to do with Jericho/Gibbs's backstory, with him basically telling the Angel to fuck off. I love it. Jodie also shines once again, and goddamn, this episode is just so good. And then the last 10 minutes, it falls completely into the Flux trap and just becomes another part of the overarching storyline. I don't enjoy it that much at that point, and when the Doctor gets turned to an angel, it was really damn exciting, and I loved it until Survivors of the Flux, which just undoes that ending basically. It's like, oh no, she's not a weeping angel, she's just been transported, to which I'm like, okay, why couldn't they just zap her over there? Because that's what the angels can do. They don't just send you in time, they also send you across space. That's never explained, and this episode is essentially just a rehash of episode 1 where it's just setting up the finale. There's nothing else to it, really. Kate Stewart is really cool to see come back, and the Grand Serpent, who appeared in the 3rd episode, it's nice that he's come back, but suddenly he's a key player in the flux despite not really having any impact, even by this point where he infiltrates UNIT. With Dan and Yaz once again being quite sidelined, but I do like their little sub-story where those two and Jericho are basically travelling the world to try and figure out how to get back to their normal time, because they're sent back like 100 years, and they have to live out there for 3 years. That's really cool to me. I love that as an idea. And the ending, I honestly think is great. It's a shock twist ending. It got me so hyped for the finale. And when it comes to the finale, I think overall it is good. But the biggest issue of the last episode of Flux has got to be the fact that it feels like about 3 episodes shoved into one, which doesn't make much sense since so many of your episodes were padded. Why not just cut out all the padding with like all the Vinda stuff? Just remove that, and you'd have a lot more space to breathe. The flux is also never fixed by the end. They don't reverse it, or at least they never say they do. So the fact that it's just kind of ignored for the next few episodes is very confusing as well. Overall, I think Flux is good, but it has many issues that this era just can't seem to shake off. A lot of bad pacing, a lot of unforgettable and great characters mixed with some truly awful ones, with the companions being sidelined so often. But Jodie's Doctor stands out. The main villains, who I haven't even mentioned yet, Swarm and Azir, I think are incredibly done. So creepy, but yet so campy. No, Flux has to be a 6 out of 10 for me, but I still think it's a massive step up from the last series. And speaking of steps up, next up is Eve of the Daleks, and I know that this episode and the next one have a massive mixed reputation online, but I fall into the love for Eve. My only issue for Eve is the obvious plot armor where Daleks are using Gatling guns but seem to be unable to shoot people directly in front of them. But everything else about this episode I think is really cool. I like the Phasmin stuff. No, it hadn't been built up properly, but I think it does shine some character onto Yaz, which is very needed. It's shocking it took, 28 episodes, 29 episodes to get there. But I still really like it. I love her relationship with Dan as well. I think they really gel together as characters. I love the supporting cast in this episode. And the Daleks are really cool in it. They're so sassy. We've got some sassy Daleks. A really good ending, in my opinion, with the twist being fully pulled on the Daleks. Yeah, I really like this episode. For me, it's an 8 out of 10. It's the best of the Dalek trilogy. And that takes us to the most recent episode, released last week, Legend of the Sea Devils. And online, I've seen a lot of criticism for this episode, and I can completely agree with the criticism for both the net bit at the start, which just comes out of nowhere, and the fact that, the monster, the big sea thing just disappears. But the rest of the episode's criticisms, I really disagree with. First of all, I love the Sea Devils. I think they're done massive justice in this episode. The sword fight, which a lot of people hate, I think it's cool. I love the Doctor doing a front flip. I think it's that level of silly that I can just accept with this show. Dan does get sidelined, as do a lot of the supporting characters, but I still really like Madame Shen and all that stuff. Apart from the weird plot moments, everything's great, and the fact that Phasmin is definitively ended with the Doctor saying, if it was anyone, it's you, but she can't do it to herself again. I love that. Solid episode, in my opinion. It's an 8 out of 10. I know a lot of people will disagree with me. And currently, that's it for Series 13. A bit of a shorter one this time, with only 8 episodes released at this point, with a Centennial special coming out later. That one's apparently going to be full 90 minutes, so we're essentially getting a 10-episode series. And yeah, I think it's definitely an improvement. Flux has quite a few issues, and there's definitely some issues with Eve of the Daleks and Legend of the Sea Devils, but I honestly really like this series, and as you can see from my little chart here for my ratings, I have given each episode of Flux a little rating, which will get their own mini rankings right here. So, no, for me, Series 13 has definitely been a step up. I think there's still some teething issues, which shouldn't be there by this point, but as a going out series, they could have done a lot worse, and I've really liked Whittaker's Doctor in this series, but I'm very excited for what comes next. that is all the series finally covered. How far are we into this video? Over 3 hours? Wonderful. My voice hurts. This has taken me so long. This video has literally taken me 9 weeks. Play clip of take me 9 weeks, lady, if I could be asked to edit that much. Yeah, doing this has actually been really fun. I love this show so much, so going through each one has been really cool, and as a little bonus, I decided to actually rank each series depending on what ratings I gave the episode with the average score. So up now is the ratings for each series, and then let's switch it around for the rankings, and yeah, I think that's quite fair. So at number 1 we have Series 4, because every episode bar 1, which isn't even technically part of the series, they're all good. Series 4 is definitely peak Doctor Who in my opinion, and no series is probably going to match it, with Series 1 being in second place. Also a brilliant series, I just wish that a bit more budget and time was given to it. I know it's not the fault of the creators, but it definitely dumbs down Series 1. Then at number 3 is Series 10. I love this series, I think it's great. I honestly think that it should have been an 11 episode series, because if you cut out the Eaters of Light, it would have been easily as good as Series 4 and Series 1. With the very mixed Series 2 taking number 4, mostly due to how amazing its amazing episodes are, whilst its bad episodes are mostly average, apart from Fear Her, which is pretty damn bad. But yeah, Series 2 is still a good start in my opinion. I think it's a good follow-up to Series 1. And with number 5 being Series 6, I like Series 6, but I do think some of the standalone stories should have done a bit more to show how good the show can be with its solo episodes compared to just the overarching narrative. Then at number 6 is Series 9, and I honestly didn't think it'd get this high. But upon rewatch, yeah, Series 9 does not deserve a lot of the flack it gets. There's a lot of good stories in there, and a lot of the two-part structures which I enjoy is what's heavily used in Series 9, so I think there's definitely some bias for that stuff. Then at number 7 is Series 7. So Series 7 is pretty much right in the middle. In fact, for all the seasons I have rated it right in the middle, and it definitely deserves that. It has some incredible episodes, but also has some of the worst, or just the most boring and average. It's a very mixed season overall, so I'm kind of glad that it ended up at number 7, because it's where it deserves. Then at number 8 we have Series 3, and I know a lot of people will be annoyed at this, but it is mostly due to that first half. I don't like the first half of Series 3 that much, apart from a couple of episodes, but the second half, if that was just a whole season, that would be number 1 easy. It's got some of the best stories the show has given. And there's a reason why Series 3 has got such a good reputation, and it's definitely that second half. But for me, the first half really does damage it. Then at number 9 we have Series 5. This one may also get me a few dislikes and stuff like that, but Series 5 isn't as good as I remember it being. It's still got some really good episodes, but a lot of it's just very middle of the road, and I'm not really sure what they were going for. It seemed to play itself a bit too safe and a bit too generic, while Series 6 really started to step the boat out in my opinion. Then we have Series 8, which was quite disappointing. It did not reflect the new Doctor very well, and it's where a lot of people started to drop off the show, and I can understand why, but I was way too far into the show to give up by this point, so I kept going, and it's got some amazing stories, but it's also got some very tedious and boring stories as well. Then at number 11 is Series 13. Flux is a great idea, but just poorly executed with some episodes, especially the 3rd episode is very flawed in my opinion, and the 5th and 6th episodes can get downright really bad at times, but overall I still think it's decent. It just needed a bit more polish and a bit more time in the writing room. Then at number 12 we have Series 12, which, yep, fits exactly there. It's an improvement over Series 11, which is why it's not in last place, but there's so many awful episodes in it, like Praxius, which is the worst episode of the entire show's history, and the Timeless Child stuff. Oh god, the Timeless Child stuff just breaks so much of the show. Then finally at number 13 we have Series 11, which, yeah, Series 11 is the worst series of the entire show's run in my opinion. It doesn't really hit with anything. Even its good episodes are only good. They're only a 7 out of 10 in my opinion. And when that's your peak, it's not exactly great. So yeah, that was my rankings for the seasons. And now it's time for, let's be honest, what you're all here for. At 141 we have Praxeus because, yeah. At 140 we have the Timeless Children and Ascension of the Cybermen. At 139 we have the Battle of Ranskor Av Kolos. 138 we have Orphan 55. 137 we have Kablam. 136 we have Fear Her. 135 we have the Ghost Monument. 134 we have Dreamland. 133 we have In the Forest of the Night. 132 we have 42. 131 we have Dinosaurs on a Spaceship. 130 we have Arachnids in the UK. 139 we have Kill the Moon. 138 we have The Hungry Earth and Cold Blood. 137 we have The Saranga Conundrum. 136 we have Love and Monsters. 135 we have The Power of Three. At 124 we have The Eaters of Light. At 123 we have The Lazarus Experiment. 122 we have It Takes You Away. 121 we have The Girl Who Died and the Woman Who Lived. 120 The Vampires of Venice. 119 The Idiot's Lantern. 118 Can You Hear Me? 117 Night Terrors. 116 The Long Game. 115 Sleep No More. 114 End of the World. 113 Closing Time. 112 The Beast Below. 111 Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS. 110 The Shakespeare Code. 109 Fugitive of the Jadoon. 108 Curse of the Black Spot. 107 Robot of Sherwood. 106 Revolution of the Daleks. 105 Victory of the Daleks. 104 Rosa. 103 The Rings of Akaten. 102 Gridlock. 101 The Wedding of River Song. 100 is Deep Breath. At number 99 we have Flux. With 98 being Daleks in Manhattan and Evolution of the Daleks. 97 The Doctor's Daughter. 96 Voyage of the Damned. 95 The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe. 94 The Infinite Quest. 93 The Return of Dr. Mysterio. 92 The Witchfinders. 91 The Unquiet Dead. 90 Let's Kill Hitler. 89 The Woman Who Fell to Earth. 88 The Lodger. 87 Resolution. 86 Spyfall. 85 Hyde. 84 Extremist, Pyramid and Lie of the Land. 83 we have Demons of the Punjab. 82 The Rebel Flesh and the Almost People. 81 Planet of the Dead. 80 The Bells of St. John. 79 Into the Dalek. 78 Thin Ice. 77 Tooth and Claw. 76 The Next Doctor. 75 Name of the Doctor. 74 Face for Raven. 73 Empress of Mars. 72 Father's Day. 71 is Under the Lake and Before the Flood. 70 The End of Time. 69 with Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror. 68 New Earth. 67 Aliens of London and World War III. 66, Listen. 65, Eve of the Daleks. 64, A Town Called Mercy. 63, The Fires of Pompeii. 62, Nightmare in Silver. 61, Last Christmas. And number 60, A Christmas Carol. Number 59, Boomtown. Number 58, Asylum of the Daleks. Number 57, Dark Water and Death in Heaven. Number 56, Unicorn and the Wasp. Number 55, The Runaway Bride. Number 54, Time of the Doctor. Number 53, Planet of the Ood. Number 52, The Christmas Invasion. Number 51, The Caretaker. Number 50, The Crimson Horror. Number 49 is Legend of the Sea Devils. Number 48, The Pilot. Number 47, The Girl Who Waited. Number 56 being Time Heist. 45 is Oxygen. With 44, The 11th Hour. Number 43, The Snowmen. Number 42, Smile. Number 41, Midnight. Number 40, The Magician's Apprentice and the Witch's Familiar. Number 39, Rose. Number 38, Smith and Jones. Number 37, With School Reunion. Number 36, With the Sontaran Stratagem and the Poison Sky. Number 35, With Utopia, Sound of Drums and Last of the Time Lords. Number 34, A Good Man Goes to War. Number 33, Partners in Crime. Number 32, Amy's Choice. Number 31, Knock Knock. Then at number 30 is Flatline. 29, we have Girl in the Fireplace. 28 with Turn Left. 27 with The Pandorica Opens and the Big Bang. 26, The Impossible Astronaut and Day of the Moon. 25, The Haunting of Villa Diodati. Number 24, The Husbands of River Song. Number 23, Rise of the Cybermen and Age of Steel. Number 22, Vincent and the Doctor. 21, The Zygon Invasion and the Zygon Inversion, with number 20 being The God Complex. Number 19 is Mummy on the Orient Express. Number 18 is Army of Ghosts and Doomsday. Number 17, Bad Wolf and Parting of the Ways. Number 16, Human Nature and the Family of Blood. Number 15, Time of the Angels and Flesh and Stone. 14 is Silence in the Library and Forest of the Dead. 13 is Heaven Sent and Hell Bent. 12, The Empty Child and the Doctor Dancers. And number 11, Day of the Doctor. In 10th place is The Doctor's Wife. In 9th place is Dalek. In 8th place is Cold War. In 7th place we have The Stolen Earth and Journey's End. In 6th place, Twice Upon a Time. 5th place, The Angels Take Manhattan. 4th place with Blink. 3rd place with World Enough in Time and The Doctor Falls. Number 2, The Waters of Mars. And number 1, The Impossible Planet and the Satan Pit. And that is my personal rankings for every single story in modern Doctor Who's run, done in about 4 hours. Yeah, so thank you very much for watching. If you've got to this point, comment beans. I don't know why, but I always ask people to comment beans. I don't even like beans. I'm not a fan of beans. Maybe I should go instead for fish fingers and custard if you got this far. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy this kind of stuff, I may do more in the future. More Doctor Who ones with all the spin-offs of the classic era, or even completely different shows. This has taken a long time to do, but I honestly really enjoyed doing it. And yeah, if this takes off, I don't think it will. I think this is more just, I got really bored at home, so I was like, screw it, I'm going to do a stupidly long video. But yeah, I really enjoyed doing this. I hope all of you guys enjoyed listening to it and listening to my opinions. And like I said, if you have differing ones, that is completely fine. Please do let me know, because I'm genuinely interested. Especially when you people see me put Cold War, because I know that's going to get me a lot of disagreements. But yeah, thank you for watching. Hope to see you all next time. If you do like this, please be sure to like, share and subscribe. And I'll see you later. Goodbye.